So, Mass Effect 3. I don't mind saying that I have been greatly hesitant in starting this video. If I might have a quick side note, really quick here at the beginning. Over the last week, and by last week I mean like 3 days, it's been a long 3 days, I have been, I had been preparing in my head exactly how I was going to approach this, changing my word usage, changing my sentence structure, going over specifics and exactly how I was going to present this review, because I didn't want the people to detract from me in the various comments section. I know there's not many, but it does bother me to see them there. It does bother me when people fling insults and hurl them all esconder, such like that. And I was trying to think of a ways that I wouldn't be accused of just being apologetic, or I wouldn't be accused of just being unpleasable, or, wanting too much, or whatever. And then, after some time considering this, I realized that one of the things I've always done on this channel is be honest. And I kind of want to keep being honest. So what you're going to get tonight is my absolutely not holding back, honest opinion on Mass Effect 3 and the ending DLC. Without question, without hesitation, for good and for bad. If that is not something that sounds appealing to you, I encourage you to go ahead and close the channel now, because that's what you're getting. Now, there is one other thing I want to discuss really quick here, and that is the fact that I will... How do I put this? I may not cover everything, because there's actually a fairly large amount to cover in Mass Effect 3. This overall review is probably going to come off as very bipolar, or schizophrenic if you prefer, because Mass Effect 3 itself is very bipolar and very schizophrenic, and it has always been my opinion that the things that are basically all good, as indeed many of the games I've reviewed have been, aren't all good simply because they're vanilla. They're all good because all of the disparate pieces that make up that game have been good, or at least the vast majority of them have been. So when you have something as complicated as a video game, and some pieces are good, some pieces are bad, some pieces are confusing, some pieces don't make sense, some pieces are neutral, some pieces are debatable, it's going to come out like that. So again, if that's not what you want to hear, there is that. I will put this boilerplate right here, right at the beginning. I do and have recommended Mass Effect 3. To date, I still do. The catch is, Mass Effect 1 was a game I considered bare edge of art, of my own personal art category. Mass Effect 2 was a game I did consider to be in the art category. Mass Effect 3 I consider to be in the buy it used or on sale category, which is pretty much as far down into good as it gets. If I was still doing my what to pay segment on I think this game is worth this much money, I would say Mass Effect 3 is worth $15. However, if you really get into the multiplayer, and I'll talk about the multiplayer in this review as well, then I would go ahead and push that up to about $20 or $30, depending on how much use you get out of it, how many friends you have playing it, etc. So it is kind of variable. But that let's just move on, and let's get to the ending DLC right now. Now, I said I didn't want to cover it in short because there was so much to talk about in the ending DLCs, and as with all such things, it's complicated. It's not something I can just say, well, the ending DLCs were good. I don't think they were just good. I don't think they were just bad. I think they were different. The tiny little touches they added in the finale were nice touches. I will freely admit that. I do think they added to the scenes rather than detract from them. I don't think they improved anything, per se. That is to say, I don't think the base formula has been changed in a significant enough way to be noticeable, noteworthy. It was a few sprinklings of cinnamon on top of the pudding, That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's what it's worth. I was this close to excited. I was this close to elated when the Harbinger actually had a line, sort of, as it was descending and firing upon you. I was like, oh my god, are we finally going to actually... No, you're not actually going to fight Harbinger still. He's still going to only have the one line. He has still been demoted to a glorified hammer. And to be completely and utterly frank, this was a problem with the game to begin with. This is a problem in the extended cut DLC even more so, because now we can basically say for a surety that's never changing. I've heard a lot of different opinions on this matter, a lot of them well-reasoned, a lot of them in contradiction to my own opinions, as I've listed before, but most people that I've discussed this issue with have agreed that there should have been some kind of presence that the Harbinger had. If not a final boss fight, as so many of us wanted, then something. Having the Harbinger show up was basically like, I don't remember which one it was. One of the Silent Hills had a series where Pyramid Head showed up for one scene, and he did this, okay? He's walking across the thing, and then he turns, and then he looks right at the camera. And then he walks off. You know, it was just a cameo. It meant nothing. It added nothing. It changed nothing. It didn't even have any of the punch that scene should have had. I know what they were going with that scene, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. I know what they were going for. I know how they were trying to portray that. But it failed so hard on its face, because it would be like if in The Dark Knight Rising, you know... actually, I'm sorry, let's take this back. It would be as if you had just watched the second Batman movie. I think that was The Dark Knight, not Dark Knight Rising. You know, so Joker was built up and built up and built up the whole thing, and then he doesn't die. And then Dark Knight Rising, this is a bad analogy. I apologize, but my general point is, if you had had a villain who had been built up for an entire sequence, an entire game, an entire movie, whatever, and then in the next thing he showed up literally to be like, hey, and then left. It doesn't matter what impact, what you're trying to go for with that scene. It doesn't matter what kind of emotion you are trying to get across, because you have officially failed, because everyone in the audience, or at least the vast majority of them, are saying, no, come back! And I know I was. When I saw the Harbinger just lift off as you're getting up from the debris, it's like, no, wait! Whatever. That was still disappointing. The scene with the elusive man and Anderson was basically untouched, and by basically I mean it actually was untouched. I did go through it twice. Only twice, because my patience is only so far, and I don't like doing the 2-mile-an-hour waddle thing with Shepard. For some reason, that just really bothers me on repeat playthroughs. Can't imagine why. But nothing changed about that scene. That's not a complaint, though. Nothing should have been changed about that scene. That was the one sequence from the beginning of the charge to the beam, actually, really from the Earth mission all the way up till the end of the game in the vanilla. That was the one scene I had no real complaints about. In fact, no complaints at all about. Beautiful. Loved it. Glad it stayed. I wish they'd added the children conversation that people had data mined, but whatever. I'm glad they left it alone. Next point after that is the catalyst. Casper the genocidal ghost. He really was, too. Now, I admit I tend to be a little bit sensitive about this sort of thing, because I don't like it. I know this is going to sound really strange, but this is admittedly a flaw. This is a pet peeve of mine, and I do try to work on this. I don't enjoy it when someone pretends or behaves as though I'm 3. I don't enjoy it when someone treats me like I'm stupid, like I can't piece 2 and 2 together, like I can't figure out things for myself. A very large amount of the dialogue of Casper really did sound like being condescended to, not just to Shepard, which at least I could understand, but to the audience. It sounded like they were laying out, okay, so here we have a phrase around here called Steve's voice, and by we I mean me and several of my friends. It's an old joke. And I'm not explain. I'm going to explain the details of this just really quick. For those of you who can follow me with me on this, feel free to do so. I raid in WoW, right? But I used to raid very high in WoW. I was in the Black Temple when the Black Temple was new, on my hunter, in the second best guild on the server, doing, I can't think of his name all of a sudden. Or rather their name, the Reliquary, the Reliquary of Souls fight, right? Very difficult fight, very taxing, very complicated. We were succeeding, because we were doing well, and I want to stress this again, okay? Reliquary of Souls, Black Temple, high-end raiding guild, very difficult fight, I'm on my hunter. Steve comes in, and I shouldn't even use his real name, whatever, it's too late now. He's long gone, this was years ago. Steve comes, obviously since BC was still out at the time. Steve comes in and says, hey, what are you doing? I'm raiding, and I'm pretty good at multitasking, so I have no problem carrying on a conversation while I'm doing this with him. Steve then proceeds to explain to me about how he's got a level 30 hunter then, and starts to explain to me, while I'm raiding, how to play a hunter. He I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. I'm not exaggerating. He starts explaining to me in intricate detail how you have your pet go after one thing and you go after another thing, but you need to make sure you're mending your pet while you're doing it, and you need to make sure you got your food ready because they're going to lose some happiness in the fight, blah, blah, blah. He's going into the details about exactly how you play a hunter while questing in vanilla, in Old World, Azeroth, while I'm raiding Black Temple. So, to this day, we have this term called Steve's voice, which is explaining something amazingly obvious or something that the person that is the recipient knows fairly well, okay? Apologies for the sidebar, but it was relevant to get the point across. That's what it felt like the Catalyst was doing. The Catalyst was explaining itself, their self, however you want to think of that, in Steve's voice. I'm sorry, maybe I'm just coming off as a little bit too elitist or prick or whatever here, and I do apologize if I'm doing so. But I didn't have any questions about the motivations of the Catalyst. I didn't have any questions about where it came from or why. Everything it said was something I had already assumed or had been inferred or what have you. This was not a surprise, this was not a revelation, and the whole tone was so conciliatory that the entire time I'm thinking, yes, okay, that's great. That's great. Click, 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 click. And a lot of the phrases, I meant to write some down. I unfortunately did not. My apologies. But I meant to write several down that were specifically just sounded like someone was a little bit on the bitter side and was writing that line specifically to get back at some of the detractors in the audience. That sort of thing can work if you do it in all good fun, guys. I don't think you were doing it all good fun. So that was a very detrimental experience to me. I found that whole sequence aggravating, and I hated doing it a second time. It was even worse the second time. Now, let's talk about the actual endings, because here's where it gets interesting. The Destroy ending was effectively unchanged. They did add the Hope Spot, grant, and they did add the speech by Hackett, which was actually pretty cool, granted. And they did add the fact that Shepard is alive. This has been confirmed now by writ rule, by word of God, as the saying goes. Well, Shepard did live in the Destroy ending if you had the high enough war rating. Okay, I'm with that. I get that. The Destroy ending, however, overall functionally and structurally was not changed. There was nothing really different. They just added to it. Overall, that doesn't bother me all that much. I don't think it really made the Destroy ending better. Again, this is a sprinkling of cinnamon kind of scenario. I am not complaining. Let me emphasize this. I would rather have a sprinkling of cinnamon than nothing, or than, throwing some feces into that, So, I am not complaining. All I am stating is that my opinion basically is unchanged because a few sprinklings of cinnamon doesn't really change the formula all that much. I will say that I personally, if I was forced to sit down and choose one of the 4 endings, the Destroy ending would be last on that list. Actually, it would probably be second to last, but I'll get into... It would not be my choice. It would not be the choice I would pick. And the reason why is because, for all intents and purposes, what you are doing is throwing everything to the wind, willingly destroying... I know a lot of people didn't care about Edie. I cared about Edie, and I cared about the Geth. I actually had a great deal of sympathy for the Geth as a whole, and there was a reason I worked so hard to make peace with them in general, but most especially and most strongly in Mass Effect 3. I don't want to wipe out entire species just to defeat our enemy. Yes, I understand that that could be an essential sacrifice, but I don't have other choices, so no, thank you. And I find it almost irritating that that's the ending in which Shepard lives, the only ending in which Shepard actually survives. Something about that is immensely frustrating to me. Probably because if you take it as a video game, rather than as a setting choice or anything like that, it feels like you're rewarding the player for being selfish, essentially. My life over the lives of the Geth. And yes, I know there are people who would make that choice, and I know there's a lot to be debated here. I am not saying that is right or wrong. I'm saying that it bothers me personally, and trying to explain why. So let's just go ahead and take the next step. Let's move on here. Let's go ahead and hit the control ending next. Now, actually, you know what? No, I'm going to take that back. Let's take the synthesis ending next. I'm going to do a little bit of sidebar here, so I apologize. But in the synthesis ending, they did fundamentally change the synthesis. I can't talk all of a sudden. They did fundamentally change the synthesis ending, and in a good way, I think. I think, unlike the sprinkling of cinnamon analogy, this actually, they took the pudding away and said, okay, we're sorry, hang on. We'll bring you a pudding-flavored three-layer cheesecake with a little dapplings of raspberry or whatever it is you like. Here you go. That's what I think the equivalent is here. The synthesis ending was improved significantly, and I did like what they did with it. However, this is important. Here's the sidebar, okay, guys? I apologize. My sister and I were working on a book once upon a time that was, this was several years ago, that was essentially set within a modified Warcraft universe, right? Taking into account all the books and all that, because I'm pretty big on the lore and could keep it within canon very easily, if you follow me. And we had the way my sister and I write both is, and several writers do this. What you'll do is you'll design characters and you'll put them in what is known as a start point, and you don't actually design what happens after that. You don't decide, okay, this is going to be a story about this war or this event or anything like that. You set the start point, and then you say, okay, with the personalities, with the individuals I've set up, with their respective power levels, their resources, their knowledge, the setting, what would happen next? And so the story kind of progresses naturally from there, if you follow what I mean. And it's kind of hard to do because the writer or writers in question need to keep track of everything at the same time. But for anyone who can do that, such as myself and such as my sister, that's something that is feasible, and it's our preferred writing method. Here's the catch. That works really well because what it does is it makes everything that happens in your book very sensical and very believable from an in-character and from an in-setting perspective. There's never any, oh, come on, or oh, yeah, that's not going to happen moments. No, there's nothing like that. There's no done for drama. There's no played for laughs. It all makes a lot of sense, and it all comes across as very believable, right? At least that's the theory. 90% of the time it does. So the catch is, and this is an important part that I'm going to discuss in just a moment here. It has to make sense because you're still making a work of entertainment, a work of art indeed. Not art is in the category, but art is in the literal medium. And you have to take that into account in addition to the fact that it must make sense in context. Both must be part of this whole, rather than just one or the other. And the reason I bring this up is we reached a point where we decided that one of the characters in question, who was incredibly powerful and had grown to an immense propensity, would have taken the crown of the Lich King and effectively taken over the Scourge, and used the Scourge as a force of good in order to help rebuild the world and help it shore up its defenses for the inevitable war with the Burning Legion. Now that made, within believe me here, I know I'm not giving you any background, but it did make perfect sense. It flowed perfectly, it worked perfectly. As a written work, it felt pat. As a written work, it felt not good. I don't have a good word here, to be honest with you. I apologize. It did not come off as entertaining reading material. And so we decided to scrap the idea, and so we thought long and hard about how to work our way around that problem. Now, bringing this all back in, yes, if Shepard had spread the synthesis, and yes, if Shepard had become one with everything and changed the fundamental structure of all life within the entirety of the galaxy, just like that, yes, what happened would have made a lot of sense. Yes, it rather did make a lot of sense. Yes, it makes sense that the Reapers would have basically joined the galactic community. Yes, it makes sense there would be no real dividing lines in the old sense of the word between species and race and all that fun stuff. It would have all blended because everything would be the same species. There's a term for that, societal term, a cultural term. It's like ultra-communist. Actually, it's ultra-socialistic, to be honest with you. But I can't think of the term. It's like Marxism taken to the furthest extreme. The existence of the whole is fully, or I'm sorry, the existence of the individual is fully subdued, subsidized. I'm sorry, it is later than I wanted it to be. I think I'm going to go turn the AC down in a minute. It is fully sublimated to the will and to the good of the whole, and thus the individual for all intents and purposes, does not exist anymore so much as a piece of the whole. And that's very much what the synthesis ending felt like, was that sort of artificial, if I might say so, paradise. Now, that would be a paradise, but it would still be an artificial paradise. No one would still have any choice in the matter. And whether or not that's actually paradise for you or not is up to individual matter of opinion. But the real point I'm trying to get across here is that while all that made perfect sense, it was incredibly boring and stupid. From a perspective of an audience, from the perspective of someone who was watching a show or playing a game or reading a book, that is not entertaining literature. It just doesn't work that way. It felt like the worst. It didn't feel. Actually, it did feel like the worst of the endings, in my personal opinion. While I would have just chosen Destroy last, Synthesis felt like they were going too far in the other direction, especially given the theme choices of Mass Effect 3. And I'll go into that later. I've got a couple of notes here. Yeah, I just got a little notepad of notes. Anyways, because I didn't want to lose them. I'd scribble them down as they occurred to me. Ooh, that's a good one. So that's the Synthesis ending. And I don't have to say that word anymore. Yes! I no longer have to stutter over my own tongue. Control ending. The Control ending, again, makes perfect sense in context, in universe. It also felt slightly less artificial, slightly less make-believe, slightly less disinteresting than the Synthesis. Damn it, I have to say it again! Ending. Then the green ending. I'm just going to start saying it. Then the green ending. It's felt slightly better than the green ending because, and here's 2 important points here. One, the Reapers were not suddenly walking hand in hand with everyone. The Reapers were being forced, and there's this really strong impression. This could just be me, but I got this really strong impression the Reapers were being fully controlled against their will in order to do this, in order to assist the galaxy and all that. And they can't do anything about it. Oh well, you know. But there is this very strong impression of the fact that the only reason they're doing this, the only reason they're not resuming the course, is because Shepard is laying down the law on them, so to speak. And so that led a sort of almost macabre error to the overall setup. And the second point, and this is the most important one, is Shepard dies in the Control ending. Now, you could argue that Shepard dies in all of them, but it's the entity that speaks to you in the Control ending is not Shepard, and that's important. It is a creation based on Shepard's existence and memory and personality and all that fun stuff. It is something that can be considered to be Shepard 2, because for all intents and purposes there are only some differences between the two, at least initially. Obviously that will grow over time. But it is no longer Shepard. It is the Shepard AI, and the Shepard AI makes it very clear that it is not Shepard, and it is acting on the behest of what Shepard would have wanted, and what Shepard had sacrificed itself for, out of honor and out of respect for that sacrifice. And I can go with that. I don't have a better way to explain that. I apologize for not going into in-depth detail here, but in summary, I can go with that. I understand the concept of, yes, I will lay down my life, and in so doing, I will sacrifice myself thus that this can happen, and they will carry on without me, right? Now, as with the, I didn't really say this, but in the green and in the blue endings both, I did feel they were improved. I mean that honestly. I mean that sincerely. I do believe that they were significantly improved over the original endings. And I do believe the 3 endings do actually have a significantly different feel to them now, which is important because they didn't before. Before, they were chromatic color copies and nothing else. You had the Crayola endings, the end. We do actually have a little bit difference in terms of tone, in terms of feel, in terms of structure with the new endings. And all of them are essentially good endings, just different types of good endings. All of them are essentially Pyrrhic victories, but they are different types of Pyrrhic victories. You know, there's variation here, and that's good. Would I call any of these endings good endings or endings that are sufficient to the Mass Effect series? No, I would not. I'll get to that in just a moment, though, because I want to talk about one other thing before I get to that, and that is the 4th ending. Called it, by the way. I did say they were going to add a 4th ending a lot, as several of my friends can attest to. And I was right. They did decide to go ahead and add a 4th ending, which I believe, I don't actually know if it has an official name, but everything I've seen has referred to it as Refusal. Now, I actually have read up on Refusal quite a bit, And I have seen a lot of comments and a lot of thoughts from my own viewers as well that refusal came off as sort of a middle finger to the viewers to say, "Oh, you don't like our endings? Fine." The fact that it is possible to trigger it by shooting the Star Child by itself does speak volumes. That's not the kind of thing you really do in jest. That's not the kind of thing you just throw in there as a joke. That's something that someone threw in there intentionally to make a point. Point made. You guys are douches. No, I'm sorry, but no. In all honesty, the point is made, and that's the fact that there is still resentment and there is still a degree of it's our fault that's coming across in the attitude of the endings itself, which is such a shame because all this time, I discussed before how the general feeling of all the PR, all the marketing, was very much, oh, it's your fault, but we'll go ahead and meet you halfway because you don't understand our ending. I was willing to forgive that per se because I figured that was just the result of the marketing department. Now it may still be, but parts of the extended DLC itself, such as the discussions I mentioned earlier and the entirety of the refusal ending, do very much have that feel still, which will lead to my final conclusion, which I'll get to in a moment, but I do want to talk about the refusal ending really quick here. I'm mentioning the refusal ending last because it was my favorite of the new endings. I mean that sincerely. The first time I played through the new DLC, that was the ending I ended up with. First one. Not because shooting the Star Child, because of the dialogue choices. And it flowed so naturally, and I was just playing the character, it was just what Zaydenru would have picked. And it kind of made sense. And the speech Shepard gave actually moved me. Would you believe that? The speech Shepard gave in the lead up to the refusal ending actually did move me, actually stirred me, I guess is the word I want to use here. Yes, we're going to die. Yes, we're going to lose. We're going to die on our terms. We're going to die because we have chosen to. We're going to die free. Not as whatever you want us to do, not as some kind of restriction that you have laid before us, and not as the puppets or tools that you wish to wield. We will die on our terms. And I liked that. I liked that a lot. And it actually made me smile while I was watching it, because I knew, without question, without hesitation, that the Reapers just laid waste. That was it, the end. Wiped everything out. There was a very strong impression, I don't think it was ever actually announced, but a very strong impression that the Reapers stopped holding back at that point and just annihilated the fleets, took out Earth, wiped the galaxy clean, move on. The reason I still, even that though, would have bothered me, except for the final point here. And that is the fact that Liara's VI, so many people had discussed this as an option for an ending, having the VI, having, I can't think of its name, also the VI's name, Blip, Dot, R2D2, I don't know, having it as the time capsule thing, as a new ending, was an option. And I actually started grinning again when I saw Liara start discussing, we couldn't do it, but maybe you can. Because not only did that make sense from an in-universe perspective, because let's remember, the only reason the Reapers win every cycle, despite their power and despite their capacity, is because they are very well prepared, and because they almost always catch us off guard. A galaxy united, which had, as if at the end of Mass Effect 1, if we had stopped Sovereign and united the galaxy, bam, I can't snap my fingers. There we go. Bam! We had united the galaxy right then and there, and we had charged off into null space and taken out the Reapers before they woken up. We would have won. The end. That could be debated. It would have been probably difficult. It would have probably been a brutal fight. But it is my personal opinion that we would have won. Leaving that time capsule and having it be found in it, I got the very strong impression it was found in time, in other words. That they did find it in time, and the next cycle went after the Reapers when the Reapers were still weak, when they still weren't ready, and won the right way. Pardon me. They didn't Deus Ex Machina their way to victory. They just went out there and won and earned it, damn it. And I liked that a lot. And it was all brought all together when the Asari was talking to the young child and describing how, thanks to the shepherd and their sacrifices, of all those people in that era. That's why we now have peace. I liked that ending. It was the death of everyone we ever knew in the Mass Effect setting, but it was the only ending and the only point, with actually two exceptions, three exceptions. It was one of 4 points in the whole of Mass Effect 3 that kept the theme they wanted, which I disagree with, but I'll get to that later, and actually pulled it off properly. Victory through sacrifice. We won. We all died, but we still won. And I really liked that. If I had a choice between the 4 endings, I would pick the refusal ending every time. Now here's the catch. Ultimately, I wouldn't pick any of the 4 endings. I would still pick mine. I would still choose the ending I laid forth. Now that is simply me and my opinion and my thoughts on the matter. I always disagreed with the direction Mass Effect 3 was going with in general. And I guess I'll discuss that next because I keep referring to it. What I'm talking about is the theme of Mass Effect 3. The theme of Mass Effect 3, victory through sacrifice, was supposed to be the big theme. War is hell, the Reapers are unstoppable, and we're all gonna die. It was supposed to be this gloomy, despairing, hopeless setup. And to an extent, they did succeed at that. As I've mentioned before, I never really liked Battlestar Galactica's reboot. Part of the reason was because the whole series was basically built on the principle of everything's crap, and then there's more crap. And I don't mean crap as in bad. I mean crap as in, everything's gone to hell. There we go. Everything's gone to hell. And then more stuff goes to hell. And then more stuff goes to hell. Something about that does not appeal to me, to be completely honest with you. And I don't think it makes for very entertaining viewing personally, with from my opinions on the matter. Mass Effect 3 was trying a little bit too hard to go for that Battlestar Galactica reboot ideal of bad stuff, goes to hell, goes to hell, goes to hell, and just laying waste. And you could argue that that's not the case, but it's really all over the place. And again, this pulls into this bipolarist thing again, because there were sections where there was honest-to-God hope, and it felt like a lot of the writers weren't really on the same page on this one. Because there were sequences, and indeed and codex entries, and dialogue, and quests, which painted the Reapers as a powerful, massive foe that we can defeat if we work together and unite on this. And then there were the other pieces which painted the Reapers as unstoppable unless we get the Crucible. In fact, one of the lines that felt most forced to me was one by Hackett. And I think he says it twice, actually, throughout the course of the game. We cannot win this. I can't do his voice at all. I can't do his voice justice. Great voice actor. We cannot win this conventionally. We cannot win... I can't do it. We cannot win this conventionally, Shepard. He says that more than once. I think it's at least 2 times. And the line has always felt forced to me. All the more so now, in the light of everything else. It felt like... Allow me to use a direct analogy, if I may. This is actually something that did happen over in Deep Space Nine. Gul Dukat, from the beginning, was designed to be in a setting that was going to be very gray versus gray, very morally ambiguous, discussing actual moral dilemmas, etc. Gul Dukat was originally supposed to be the black, and Sisko was originally supposed to be the white. You with me? That's fine. The problem is, somewhere along the line that wasn't communicated properly, and so the actor and the writers and the directors all turned Gul Dukat into an actual character, and he became much more gray, and had a lot of potential to actually become white for a while there, or indeed at least good, one of the protagonists. And this has been debated a lot, and I'm not going to get into that debate right now, but all I'm saying is that there were feelers that were sent out. There was attempts to humanize, to use an improper word here, the character, and I thought they succeeded. And then right at the end, the guy, whose name I can't remember, who was saying, Gul Dukat was supposed to be the black, came in and said, no, no, and basically did an entire episode. And by basically, I mean literally. They did this entire episode purely to get across the point that Gul Dukat was black. No, really, stop talking about it. That is a lot of what Mass Effect 3 felt like. It felt like he was like, okay, this is going to be this dark, despairing, horrible story of doom, and we cannot beat the Reapers. Okay, go, team. And somewhere along the line, the writers and the voice actors and the other writers and the other writers didn't really get the message, and so There were spots where that feeling didn't get across, where that impression never got across, whether literally and otherwise. And then every now and again it'd be reinforced again, and then it would go away again, and it would be reinforced again. And the overall theme they were going for in Mass Effect 3, this whole despairing arc thing, to be completely honest with you, I felt it was a mistake. I still feel it was a mistake. Mass Effect as a series has always had several themes going through it. The triumph of unity, the success against impossible odds, and I don't know how to describe this one, the ability to go into a situation that is a no-win scenario and still come out with everyone lives. Or at least most everyone lives. But, this is, and for anyone who's wondering, that's a Doctor Who reference. This time, everyone lives. I love that scene. There was a very strong feel of that in a lot of Mass Effect 1 and 2. Very, very few exceptions. That Vermeer is actually the only exception I can come up with off the top of my head. There's probably some other smaller exceptions, so I apologize if I'm missing them. But there were so many quests, side quests, primary points, where you were in this terrible situation and it looks like you had to make a bad choice, and you could make the bad choice, or you could make, if you were good enough, emphasis, if you had enough points in Charm, or you had enough points in Intimidate, or if you were enough Paragon, or if you're enough Renegade, or if you're high enough level, or if you could beat this boss in such a certain way, or whatever, you could pull it off, and congrats, you got your third option. And it worked out, and that has been a prevailing theme in the Mass Effect series, all throughout, basically. And indeed, even Mass Effect 3 had that. Tachanka, the Rannoch series, Actually, those are the only two I can think of off the top of my head. But, both of those are very strong examples. Rannoch especially. Yes, it was, again, a hard choice. Do you have to choose between the Geth, or you choose between the Quarian? And that's kind of a hard choice, if I'm honest with you, because both sides are victims of each other and of themselves. And choosing between that is almost impossible, and I was so happy when I found out. As I was playing, I was terrified that they were actually going to force that option because, again, of the bipolarism. But they didn't. There was a third option. There was a way for everyone to live, and it was, if I might say so, beautiful. It was a beautiful scene. Does this unit have a soul? And the answer was yes. And peace between the Quarians and the Geth for the first time since several centuries ago, I believe, total. I don't actually remember the date. For a long time. For several generations. That was a powerful moment. That was a beautiful moment. And it was a reaffirmation to me of of my faith in the series, to be honest with you, which is so cruel given what happens immediately after that. Because I had been having some severe doubts about Mass Effect 3 until I did Tachanka, and then I did Rannoch. And actually, it's Tachanka, Citadel, Rannoch, if I'm not mistaken. But you get the idea. Only to be so disappointed by the end. Or in the end, I should say. Not by the end. I guess I was disappointed by the end, but you get my point. Now, because of this overall themes, I should say, of the Mass Effect series, suddenly and violently switching that to war is hell, and victory through sacrifice, and you can't save everyone. Important. Can't save everyone. Which not only completely flies in the face of the previous themes, but also is literally the opposite of one of the previous themes. Really, in my opinion, was a misstep. I felt that this should have been more a story about unity, a story about coming together in face of impossible odds, because let's be honest, the galaxy has never actually been that unified in the Mass Effect series. We have unified individuals, we have unified certain sections of people, we have unified certain organizations, but we had never actually made really a difference on the galactic scale. Mass Effect 3 really had some potential to have us help fix the galaxy, not just save it. Now, some of that was delivered, as I've said before. But you can't save everyone, and the lack... You get the point. It didn't really deliver. It didn't actually fulfill on that hope, I guess I should say. Maybe that was my fault for hoping in such a promising ending. My God, I'm starting to sweat. I'm sorry, I'll be right back. I need to turn the AC down. Oh my goodness. I apologize. Wow, it is way too hot in here. Okay, whew. Starting to have trouble concentrating. That's one of the reasons I had to do that. My point, I guess I'm getting to here, is that Mass Effect 3 has a very strong feeling of... Oh, what's the term I'm looking for here? There's a term for a pet project, basically, right? Let's say you are in charge of... Yeah, you are given... Okay, let's say you're working on a series of books, and you have a degree of oversight in this, and you are finally told, okay, you can go ahead and write your book, and you're like, yes, I've always wanted to write a book about the Holocaust. Okay? Now, that's a terrible thing, but that's kind of my point, if you'll understand. You don't want... I'm not saying making light of the situation. You wanted to write a book about how absolutely horrible and terrible and screwed up it was, right? Now, let's say, to continue this theme, your entire series of books up to this point that you've been having some degree of oversight on, or whatever, has been about World War II and the triumph of the individual in exceptional circumstances. The kinds of people who refuse to take out the horrible orders. Lots of working together across the lines and trying to minimize losses and helping refugees get out. That sort of thing, right? If that's what your whole series has been about in terms of theme, and you suddenly want to do a focus piece on the Holocaust, somewhere along the line, someone should say that doesn't really fit. Because it doesn't. It does not fit. The level of despair they were reaching for in Mass Effect 3, in my completely honest opinion, had no place in the Mass Effect galaxy. The Mass Effect galaxy was not a despairing place. It was not a dismal place. It was a place that had a spark. It had just a little bit of a spark, because as I mentioned before, the question was asked, is this galaxy worth saving? That is a good question. It's good that was posed, but the answer that I found, and many other people found that I've talked to about that, was yes, it is worth saving. Yes, it is worth going out and killing ourselves and struggling and going through quests and missions and everything and just facing impossible odds in order to save this galaxy. To turn it all in its ear and immediately turn it into this despair piece of horribleness and war and trauma, it just flew in the face of all of that. And it really had that strong feeling of every time one of the writers or one of the teams was trying to reach out a bit, they were reined back in, if you know what I mean. And that just keeps happening throughout the thing. And it's funny, I'm sorry, I've been talking for like 40 minutes already. I haven't even left my very first bullet point here. But this is an important thing. This is so much of everything that, in my opinion, is the true problem with Mass Effect 3, all wrapped up within this one issue. Everything else is details and analysis, but everything in Mass Effect 3 can all be tied up to, in my opinion, into this one point right here. The theme was wrong, and there's no real fixing that at this point. You know what I mean? And so Mass Effect 3, in my opinion, falls short of its predecessors. And that's the reason it's down here at a $15 range, rather than at like 70 or 80 or whatever, That's the reason that it's an acceptable game, a good game, one that I do recommend, provincially, for the cheap, on the cheap. Not a game that I strongly actually recommend. So, let's go ahead and move on from this step, okay? I'm going to hit these in no particular order at this point. Okay. As I mentioned before, there was a Twitter thing going on right before the release of Mass Effect 3, which I thought was beautifully done. It was Emily Wong, and the whole Twitter feed, ironically, carried the theme of... Oh, I'm sorry, there was one other theme of Mass Effect 1 and 2 I forgot to mention, and indeed of the books, and that is the theme of defiance. Not contradictoriness, not contrarianism. Defiance, the refusal, which is a different feeling than hope. Hope is, there will be a better tomorrow someday. Defiance is, I refuse to let you fit me. In fact, I'm sorry, one of the reasons I liked the refusal ending so much was the refusal ending was defiance personified, and it did end up working in the end. Which again fits with the themes of the game, of the series, so much better than the other endings of Mass Effect 3, which all just kind of came out of nowhere and didn't follow any of the themes, even of Mass Effect 3 itself. Rather, that ending actually felt like the Mass Effect ending, if you follow what I'm saying here. I still prefer mine, but let's just move on. But that whole defiance, that whole uniting in improbable circumstances, the unity of the circumstance, all of that was present. All of these themes I just mentioned, so this is a good segue point here, were present in her little story. up to and including her death. Emily Wong's whole thing, Mass Effect changed the industry by having the oh my god, it's actually in-game cutscenes rather than cinematic cutscenes thing, and really getting the show off with a bang. That was a good move. Mass Effect 2 started with the death of the main character in a traumatic and horrible circumstance that was beautifully done and fantastically amazing. And for those of us who didn't know it was coming, was a true gut punch in the proper way, in the way that was just like, oh my god, you know. Anytime you manage to make the player say, oh god, then you have successfully succeeded at whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. Mass Effect 3's beginning was boring, dull, and frankly out of character. If they had had Emily Wong's whole story actually done with in-game cutscenes, it doesn't even have to be interactive, none of it did. If they had actually followed her story and ended it, I can actually picture it. If you'll picture it with me, picture Emily Wong, and she's in the thing, and she's bloodied and matted, and there's the dead troops in the van with her, or whatever it was, car of some kind, hover car of some kind, and she looks up through the window, and the camera's like back here, back behind her head, and it looks past her, and you see the destroyer that she's looking at, and she says, gets up here, turns on the van, and starts going after her, and you give a view right about here of her face. I guess I should look at the camera here, you know, of her face, and she says, "You want to see? Would you like to see how a human dies?" And then have a quick cut behind her, actually behind and up, to show this, and you see the destroyer approaching from this angle, and then it cuts back to her face, and she says that wonderful line, "at ramming speed," and then you just cut to black. Don't show what actually happens. Just cut to black right there. Mass Effect 3. Tell me that wouldn't have been awesome. Tell me that wouldn't have been another fantastic beginning to the game, and another excellent way, setting the tone, setting the feeling of it, setting the setting, laying out all the rules, laying out all the conditions of exactly what's happening right there. Bam! Just like that. That would have been glorious. So I think that was a missed potential of epic proportions that they managed that, or rather didn't manage that, if I can say so. I already talked about Harbinger. I don't know what else to add to Harbinger. At the very least, he should have had some presence in the game. Harbinger was built up to be the Reaper, and there was a lot of agreement and disagreement and discussion and arguments about whether or not there should be a the Reaper. See the argument about the Borg Queen over on Star Trek for a similar type of argument. But even those people who thought there shouldn't have been a the Reaper agreed, at least for the most part, that Harbinger, as a Reaper, as an individual Reaper who has had a strong personal and direct connection to Shepard and thereby to the players, should have had a presence in the game, and didn't. And it sucked. I'm just going to say it flat out. It sucked. Again, I point to my earlier example. It'd be like having a movie where the Joker is built up through the whole movie, and the next movie it's like, alright! And he just walks by and is like, hey, to the camera. You know, no, you don't do that. Fail! If I may say so frankly. Now, let's go ahead and move from fail to good. Again, this is going to be kind of bipolar, just like I told you. The whole of the Rannoch missions in general were awesome, but I'd like to talk about one thing specifically before I go over Rannoch in general, and that is the Geth Consensus, which was awesome. That was out of nowhere, but fit perfectly, flowed naturally, and here's the important part, really added. Not just to the setting, but to the scene and to the gameplay. It was a beautiful segue into a different gameplay mode, and it did it brilliantly. I loved the Geth Consensus section. Actually going through and seeing the memories of what happened during the Geth Rebellions, or rather just prior to the Geth Rebellion, seeing the different... There were a lot of different touches in the Geth Consensus. An excellent example is that the platforms you're standing on actually moved in time with Legion's speaking. In other words, in relative terms, you are actually flowing on a data table that Legion itself, or themselves, or however you want to think of that, had created in order to move you through the consensus, which was a nice little touch. And the Reaper indoctrination being a continuously growing, unless you chop it off at a specific weak point, which is not immediately accessible to the data it's accessing, it made perfect sense. And that probably isn't the most well-structured sentence I've ever said. But speaking technologically, it actually did make a lot of sense that a completely third-party software, in this case Shepard, had to be introduced in order to sever the indoctrination programming. Had to, because of the way it was designed. And so, and you know, that whole self-replicating thing. I actually had the mental image that the data the indoctrination programming was trying to take was fighting it off for quite a while, and it would just regrow and regrow and regrow and regrow until finally it stopped. It just gave up, and you know, it required you to come along in order to fix it. I like that. I liked that a lot. The whole section was well designed, well thought out, well executed, and really fleshed out Legion and the Geth and the Quarians and the setting. Top notch, BioWare. Now, I almost said Blizzard. I don't know why I keep doing that. Blizzard, BioWare. Um, they all start with B. They're both game companies. That's enough, right? The entirety of the Rannoch mission was a mission I truly enjoyed. I admit this sincerely. I remember getting up to the Rannoch mission, and the whole time I'm thinking, where are the Quarians? There was like a little snippet early on, very early on. I don't remember if it was the Codex or if it was something one of the casual NPCs said, but it was basically, the Quarians have not been in contact, and they went off to this area to do something. You know, and that was it. And it's like, okay. And so the whole game, I'm just sitting on like a little bit of pins and needles. The back of my mind, I'm like, where are the Quarian? Where's the Geth? Where's Tali? Anybody? You know? Finally get around to it. I'm like, yes, Rannoch. All right, let's go. Or not Rannoch, but, you know, the Quarian Geth storyline. Let's go finish that up. Let's see what happens. Get out there, encounter Tali, the Admiral now. And, you know, I have several things I could say about that, but I don't want to get into too much minutia. Suffice it to say, I do think it was rather well executed. I do like several facets of it. Now I want to discuss specifically. The revelation that the device you were after was a Reaper was appropriately dramatic. It was a very appropriate, oh god, moment. Just like I mentioned earlier, it was like, oh god, that's actually a Reaper. Go! Go! You know, the section where... actually, this is kind of a negative. The section where you're on the back of the truck and you can shoot at the destroyer, I'm not sure why that section was there. It felt completely unnecessary and was literally a cinema sequence. You could have just sat there not firing and nothing changes. I'm not sure why that was there. They could have actually had a bit of a mini fight on the turret as you're fighting the thing before you get back, and then actually fight the Reaper. I thought that would have been nice, but let's move on. I did like the infiltration mission onto the Geth Dreadnought. I thought that was actually really well done, and I loved approaching and finding Legion. I was like, yes, Legion! I've been hoping to see you this whole time, and immediately, within a matter of seconds, you're able to reaffirm, yes, I'm still with you, Legion, and Legion is immediately like, yes, I'm still with you, Shepard Commander. You know, the bond of friendship and unity that you had formed back in Mass Effect 2 is just right there. We're here. We're ready to go. And there are some choices on that matter. I need to make a point of that, to mention that later, because that is an important thing to mention. But obviously I'm speaking from my personal playthrough experience from the saves I uploaded, which Legion was saved, and I was cool with everyone and had everyone's loyalty. But Legion comes through for me, and that whole thing, and the whole movement through the Dreadnought, and the whole slightly timed jumping puzzle energy thing, elevator sequence, all of that was awesome. It was also a sequence in which I had both Tali and Garrus, and it was the first sequence, if I'm not mistaken, where I had both of them together. And it was the first time their relationship was really starting to show. In a good way, mind you. I actually liked the banter the two had between each other. It was awesome. I know I'm kind of jumping around a bit here. I do apologize. I'm still waiting for that AC to kick in. My goodness. I should just get one of the fans from the warehouse. Those fans are like 15 feet tall. Anyways, next thing. I really enjoyed the fight with the Destroyer Reaper. I really enjoyed the conversation with it. It was the first time we actually got to talk to a Reaper. The whole game. Actually, it is the only time we talked to a Reaper. The whole game. Because the Catalyst Godchild AI does not count. A little bit disappointing. But I will admit that conversation itself went really well. And here's a key point. One of the things I said back in Mass Effect 2 that was awesome was that you could take the Renegade choices and you could take the Paragon choices, and with the one exception, both were awesome for the different reasons. That conversation was one of the only conversations I saw that actually branched rather significantly based on which direction you went with it. That conversation literally went a completely different direction if you were going for, I want to call it Paragon, but you know, if you chose a different path of how to discuss with it, and a completely different direction over here if you chose to, tell them off basically. And both were awesome in their own different ways. I wish I could remember this line word for word, but there's a line in the left choice over here, or I suppose my right choice, where, you know, we will continue fighting and we will show that the race that created you did not die in vain, and now they can finally rest in peace at last as the Reapers is the glow is going out and it's actually dying. I liked that. And of course, over on the other side, why don't you tell your Reaper friends I'm coming? And then she pulls up the targeting signal and centers it on its weak point as it's lying there. It's like, you know what? I'll tell them myself. Awesome. Completely different reason for it being awesome, but it was still awesome. Important note. And finally, of course, again, I could go into much more detail about much more things, but finally, I think the real thing to mention here is what I already have mentioned, which is the actual moral dilemma. Now, this is just my opinion. I've always been rather sympathetic towards synthetic life in various forks of science fiction, so forgive me. But when I consider the Geth, I consider them the equivalent of any sapient sentient life. So, one Geth, one Quarian, they're different species, but otherwise they're equivalent. You with me? Based on that premise, which I know not everyone is with, but based on that premise, it was a genuine moral dilemma. Who do we side with? Who do we go with? The dilemma is there, and we had the one admiral who wasn't gung ho about it or wasn't obstinate about it so much as he was actually correct, if that makes any sense. He didn't come off as just some bastard who was, I'm a military and we need to kill them all. Woo! He never came across as that. He actually was someone who was trying to take care of his people, genuinely cared, and saw a tactical advantage and wanted to execute it. He didn't know all the circumstance involved and was not inclined to take the diplomatic option. And to be quite honest, he was technically correct in doing so as from a military standpoint. I'm sorry, from a military standpoint, he was correct. In general, he was technically correct. Now, I do say that on purpose, but let's move on. The Geth, by contrast, as Legion is there, he's just like, I need to upload this so they can be properly utilized, so they can actually be properly sentient and not have to rely on this giant thing in order to function as sentient beings. They were trying to ensure the existence and survival of their species, just like the Admiral was. And as Tali is begging him, please don't do this, and Legion's like, I don't really have a lot of choice, I need to do this. And that whole time we were building up to that, again, I was really torn. I was really hoping for a third option. When it presented itself, I leapt on it. Whoa, yes, please! Which was awesome, because it made perfect sense. To be able to successfully talk the Admiral down, again, brings up my point most strongly. That is an excellent example of him not being an idiot, not being a stupid evil, or not being, a malicious moron or bastard or whatever you want to call it. He was willing to listen. It took Shepard, him or herself, along with Tali, in order to get the fleets to finally stop, but it did work. And it did pay off. And it paid off beautifully. And I really loved that whole scene. Now, there's one other real quick thing I want to talk about really quick here. Little touches really did help flesh out Mass Effect 3. You could tell there were a lot of individual scenes, just little tidbits, that actually did have some really good feeling to them and really good writing to them, really good dialogue. And the scene I'm talking about is the scene where Tali picks up the rock. Yes, I know this is my wallet. Picks up the rock and says, first homeowner, or whatever she said, of Rannoch. And she was looking at the cliffside, or it was actually looking out into an area. There's the cliff over here, and there's the rocks, and gonna build a house. Make the window right about there. That whole scene was poetry. I loved that, and it really showed how Tali had, despite growing and suffering and hurting and seeing people, die around her, it showed that Tali was, in her heart, still Tali. That she was still the hopeful, optimistic, idealistic individual who wanted the happy ending for everyone, and I liked that, and I liked giving it to her, at least, giving her that happy ending within the sake of the Rannoch mission. Loved it. Now, let's go ahead and knock that one off the list, and discuss something a little bit earlier on in a slightly worse manner. the Thessia mission. Now, I've gone on record before saying I did not like how Kai Lang was introduced or utilized within Mass Effect 3. He was forced and artificial. Yes, I know he was in the books, or comics rather, or whatever you want to call them, extended works, whatever you want to call that. Yes, I know Kai Lang was there. Yes, I've read those. No, I don't actually care. Not only should that not be required for the enjoyment of the game, but more importantly, they utilized him wrong. Kai Lang was being trumped as this anti-Shepard, ultra badass who managed to just trounce you somehow, and was a very smug, arrogant, smug, uh, irritating, smug. Did I say smug? His whole personality was being presented as someone you just wanted to punch. Not a villain you actually rooted for, like the Elusive Man. Not a villain you had a degree of respect for, or charismatic for, like, or interest in, like, say, Harbinger. Not a villain you could understand and who was sympathetic, like Saren. He was just a smug snake who you wanted to punch every time you saw him on the screen, and he just kept emphasizing it over and over. Immediately after that mission, he sends you that email being like, I'm the new wave of the galaxy and you're old news. The whole thing was so cliche, so poorly done, so fake, so forced, so artificial. That is my problem with Kai Lang. I think they could have done something more appropriate with him if they had actually bothered to do so. If they had made Kai Lang either in one direction, made him the faceless mook, the literal tool of the Elusive Man, someone who has no personality of his own besides being the fighting force, and maybe just have a couple little hints of personality underneath there. That could have worked. Or if they'd gone the other direction and made him a lot more sympathetic, a lot more interesting, and added some real character to him other than, oh, I'm so bad, something like that would have really helped flesh him out and made him an interesting character. As it was, having him at the end of the Thessia mission, which in general I did not enjoy, really just came out of left field and irritated the heck out of me. And it's also worth noting that they cheated. I really hate it when the game developers cheat. It's a pet peeve, and I'll admit that. When you have someone who's supposed to be powerful, there are methods you can do, both in setting and in terms of game mechanics, to make them powerful. It's feasible, it's viable, it's something you can do. One of the absolute worst and most cheap and cheating methods of doing that is making them invincible. I remember distinctly having, I don't remember what the weapon is, to be honest with you, but I had whatever weapon I was using at the time, trained on him. Gunship comes down, and I've still got my eye on him. I've still got my aim on him, and I'm just wailing into him, because screw your gunship. And his health does this. I was actually keeping up with his regen. Now, he is fully invincible until he manages to completely regen. I emptied a full clip before he started to get up, and then started bringing him back down again, until the gunship finally was doing enough damage to me that I had to get back behind cover. It felt so forced and so irritating to just have that there. At that point, I was like, okay, is there any need for me to be here for this scene, or do you want this to just play out in a certain way? And indeed, the actual cutscene that happened after that, where Shepard nearly dies as Kai Lang owns the entire squad, and does so in just the most arrogant fashion, really felt like that's what they were going with to begin with. And I'm like, okay, this is all great. Can we move on, please? Now, on top of that, there are two other things about Thessia I want to talk about really quick. Technically three. One, I did like... three. One, I really did like the reveal about the Prothean beacon and the snippets of advancement that the Asari had been giving, which is why they were so culturally and technologically and societally advanced over everyone else. I actually liked that. It made sense. It fit. It added to the characters. It added to the setting. It really was a nice little touch on it, and was appropriate level of hypocritical irony in that circumstance. Given, if you'll recall, the rule on hiding Prothean artifacts, which they mentioned way back in Mass Effect 1, was laid down by the Asari. Anyways, and on top of that, or at least it was pushed forward by the Asari. Yes, the Council put it down, but you get my point. And I liked that. I liked that little addition. It really did add to the setting. It was really frustrating and irritating to have Kai Lang walk in and take the VI and just be like, "Yep, I win." He snaps his fingers and he wins. Ugh. One thing I did not like about Thessia was that it was designed to be a player punch, but it was not done nearly as effectively as it should have been. The death of Shepard at the beginning of Mass Effect 2, very appropriate, very effective player punch. The death of the Vermeer, whoever dies in the Vermeer incident, very effective player punch. The fall of Thessia and the loss to Kai Lang, not very effective. The whole thing just felt frustrating and irritating, and again, forced. It felt like they were like, okay, we need to have another punch. We need to have another screw you. It felt like, how do I put this? Actually, I'm not going to make that analogy. It felt like they were trying to reach for that same sort of ideal, and they didn't know where to go with it. They didn't know how to do it, and so they just kind of piled an artificial checklist of, okay, this went wrong, and this went wrong, and this went wrong, and there was no actual pathos. There was no actual feeling to any of the circumstances that happened. And yes, Liara was certainly broken up about the whole circumstance. And Liara, especially being that broken up about the circumstance, since again, Liara is still Liara, and despite all the hardening that she's undergone and the fact that she is actually more brusque and cold of an individual, she's still over here on the scale, if you know what I mean. Her taking the fall of Thessia made sense to me, but the fall of Thessia itself was very poorly handled, and if nothing else, if absolutely nothing else, they should have really fleshed out the post-Thessia scenes on the Normandy. As it was, keeping in mind, my Shepard was in a relationship with Liara, which didn't amount to a hill of beans in this case. All it was a quick conversation that lasted, I think, like 2 minutes, and that's it. The conversation between Tali and Garrus right before that, where both of them are discussing Liara and how to best take care of her, had more weight and depth and impact to it than the conversation you had with Liara itself. Not cool, guys. Now, to say one thing I did like about the Thessia conversation, or about the Thessia circumstance, again, we're just going back from like to dislike here, aren't we? Is the conversation with the elusive man. You could tell by the way he was written. This was an instant where the writer of the dialogue was doing a very good job. His word choice, his tonality, his selection of how he was doing it, and Martin Sheen's acting, of course, really added flavor to this. Really showed that he was fully indoctrinated at that point, if there was any question in the matter. But he actually, they don't need to say it at that point. He showed it through his actions. He showed it through his word choice. He showed it through how he was presenting himself. And that's always a more preferred way to do that in works of fiction, is to show something rather than to say it. And I think, you know what, this just hit me. That is why the Thessia mission bothers me overall. Saying Thessia has fallen and you should be sad is different from showing it. Showing the elusive man being indoctrinated and being the well-intentioned extremist who has gone too far works great. And they never actually say that, at least not there. Uh, really worked out, really added to that scene. So again, I liked that. I liked how that worked out. Now, let's go ahead and move on from Thessia here. So I just mark these off my list. One of the things I did like was the changes to the AI as far as difficulty. And I did like the fact that the enemy units will actually coordinate, will use their abilities deliberately and intentionally. The Cerberus units in general, and a specific, like I suddenly can't think of the names. The one that's got the blade and the one that's got the sniper rifle, working in correlation with one another, and the guys who throw the smoke grenades. All of them would use their abilities logically and decisively, especially as you crank the difficulty up. And I liked that a lot because it actually made you think and actually made you coordinate with your team in order to beat them. However, I do freely admit I ended up turning the difficulty down for the first time in my Mass Effect career here, on my real playthrough, last playthrough at this point, that because that was fine. On top of that, the amount of artificial difficulty added, which is what I did not like, was ridiculous. The amount of shots it took to bring down even the most basic of units got to be a little bit silly, if I might be honest with you, and frankly boring. Once you successfully started using your brain and started approaching tactics, you should be rewarded by successfully beating the enemy, if I might be so bold to say. You should not be detracted from that by being then forced to do that over and over and over until it becomes incredibly repetitive. And it's a very specific point of boring. I've never actually come up with a word for this. It's basically if you can imagine an incredibly repetitive task that if you screw up, you lose a hand. Like working on an assembly line, okay? This is actually a great example. Working on an assembly line, if you screw up, this is an older assembly line, obviously. You screw up, your hand goes a little far to the right, and this incredibly repetitive task here, you lose some finger, you lose some hands. And yes, I know there are manufacturers that still work like that, but you get the point I'm getting across. It's very boring and very repetitive, and if you screw up, you're penalized deeply for doing it. That is not good combat design, if I might be so bold. The AI difficulty increased with it. The artificial difficulty increased. No. I told you this would be a bipolar review. um, excuse me. Bunch of. Oh yes, that's right. Wait, what? I have no idea what that point was supposed to be. Sorry, I was kind of scribbling these whenever they occurred to me. Let's go over a couple little things. As I said before, there are a lot of little details that Mass Effect 3 did succeed at. One of those was Conrad Werner, believe it or not. Now, I didn't actually know this my first playthrough, because I apparently did the 4 side quests from Mass Effect 1 and 2 in the right order and at the right way, so that the conversation went beautifully, and Conrad Werner did end up getting saved, and he ended up hooking up with the one girl, and revealed that he is actually a doctor. I loved that. That was actually a perfect type of reveal. Made a lot of sense, actually, because if you think about it, in game 1 and 2, Conrad is trying to be this, oh, I'm a badass, Shepard wannabe, mercenary, N7, yeah. When he's clearly and very decisively not. In Mass Effect 3, it's revealed the reason he is all that is because he's actually a doctorate in, I forget what he actually says, but, blah, 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 blah. And that kind of thing, that kind of individual who has the ability to go through that sort of thing is generally not going to be the kind of person who can become an N7. I liked that. It made sense. It actually added to the character. And the whole scene where they're discussing the ammunition thing and the heatsink thing was hilarious. And so I actually liked that. And I mentioned that specifically for 2 reasons. One is the little points. There were a lot of little points in Mass Effect 3, I keep saying this, that were actually really well done. A lot of the little conversations you'd see, a lot of the emphasis that you would encounter. Let me give you another example here. One of the things I thought they performed well in the Citadel prior to the first mission is as you're going around, you get a nice view of how the overall war is interacting with all these different people's lives from different cultures, from different races, from different financial sectors, from different styles of living, from different divisions of living. All sorts of different people you see on the Citadel are actually being interacted with or rather are being affected by the war in completely different ways, and I actually really liked that. I liked how they showed that. I liked little news reports. I liked the little side conversations. You could probably already guess now that there's already a negative coming, because that's just how this whole review is. But there was a rather annoying problem. I mentioned this back in my Mass Effect 2 review. In Mass Effect 2, they started the walk-by conversation thing, which was a good mechanic, I thought. It was a good way of adding content and adding flavor to it, and doing so in a way that made it feel like a living world, rather than what older games were basically forced to do, and if you wanted to get any flavor, you would have to walk up to an NPC, and then a little text box would show up, and then it would go away. Having people just chatting with each other, regardless of you. As an aside, what in God's name is that? Oh, for God's sakes, people. As an aside, as you're traveling by, made lots of sense, and flowed really well in Mass Effect 2. In Mass Effect 3, the problem is so many of those conversations had the problem of advancing one line, or in some cases 2 lines, oh my god, every time you walked by. Or rather, every time you walked by once per load of the zone. That's the real problem. If you just had to do this, like say in Mass Effect 2, to get the whole conversation, I could have lived with that. The fact that I had to go through the hospital, and then back, take the loading lift, go through the commerce area, back, loading lift, hospital, loading lift, commerce. And keep in mind, these are long conversations. So, I'm still going. And this is extremely sped up version, of course, because, loading times, and there's no real sprint function. and you're just doing this forever, and oh my god. And it's worth noting, I did want to hear what happened next. I wanted, my favorite example of this, and the reason I use the hospital specifically, was the Asari Commando, and the whole situation she had with the family that Joker's sister was with, and the whole circumstance with her mate, or her friend, whatever. That was an interesting and engaging story. Having to go through the zones umpteen billion times and facing the loading screen umpteen billion times to get that was not interesting or engaging. It was frustrating and irritating, and it got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm really tempted to just look up this conversation and get to the end point here because this is frustrating the heck out of me. And there were many ways they could have smoothed that out. Again, just not requiring the loading screen would have been one. Having it timed would have been another thing. Having it so that you don't have to walk by every time, so you could just stand there, and as long as you're standing there, the conversation continues within the audio reach sensor that they did have, that is programmed into the game. So as long as you're within that bubble, the conversation just continues. All of these would have made it work. All of these would have fit. Instead, it was just irritating and frustrating and pointless. Now, let's segue that into the Spectre choices thing here. The Spectre choices thing I thought was a very good move, if incredibly poorly implemented. One step forward, one step back. The thought that you can actually make choices finally, now that you finally have the authority to actually make choices and use your Spectre authority properly, made a lot of sense. Made a lot of sense for the setting, made a lot of sense for the specifics of Mass Effect 3 itself, whereas it wouldn't have made a lot of sense in 1 or 2. And really added to the choices feel that Mass Effect 3 desperately needed. I'll get to that later. And if anything, I wish they had added it more, because ultimately every single one of those choices resulted in two things. One, benefit, a little bit of an email describing the result of your choice, or in the case of the engineers from the Normandy in Mass Effect 2, them joining your crew, and a whole bunch of extra scenes with those engineers. Awesome. Again, using that Asari Commando as an example. By the way, I gave her the gun. And for anybody who's wondering, yes, I knew what she was going to do with it, and I still gave her the gun. I felt like she deserved that peace. And that's all I can say about that. But my point being that was nice, that was good. Downside, it was a war asset rating effect. I'm sorry, I still think to this day that the war asset rating was basically a mistake. The concept was sound. The execution was not. The idea of having a list of here's exactly what you have and here's exactly how you're going to use it has been done before to a lesser extent and has been done before successfully. Neverwinter Nights 2 did that with the Keep. Neverwinter Nights Hordes of the Underdark did that with several of your comrades and the way you dealt with them, especially when you finally faced against Mephistopheles. There were several previous games. I'm trying to think of a non-BioWare example here because they've done it right themselves. Yes, I know Neverwinter Nights 2 wasn't BioWare, it was Obsidian. You get my point, though. There have been examples of games that have pulled off that kind of, here's a list of what you have accomplished and done it properly. Mass Effect 3 did it very improperly. Mass Effect 3's war asset rating... I'm trying to think how to explain this properly. It never felt like it mattered. Yes, it did matter, but it never had any visual impact. It never had any story impact. It never changed anything in the game other than which endings were accessible to you. And it never felt like it mattered, if you know what I'm saying. As opposed to the Keep, where, now that you've made the Wizard Tower, you can go into the Wizard Tower and do this and that. And now that you've sent these adventurers off, they're going to come back sometime later and say, hey, by contrast, helping Jacob and helping the ex-Cerberus operatives escape, that scene was excellent in its own right. Actually, I'm not going to say excellent, it was good in its own right, and I'll get to that later. But after it was done, all it did was change your war rating, and it never had any impact on anything after that at all, if you follow what I'm saying here. And furthermore, yes, I know it's unrealistic to expect some level of change in the final battle because of the time and development nightmare that video game development is. However, if it's impossible for you to complete your your thought process like that, if it's impossible for you to fulfill on the unspoken promise that you have granted by having something like a war asset rating mechanic within your game, don't have the mechanic. The end. And here's the final bottom line with war asset rating, and this is, even including the thing I just said, this is what really damned it, in my opinion. It didn't add anything to the game. In fact, it actually detracted in many points. So many of the things you did added war asset rating, and that was supposed to be considered a reward, but it never was. It never actually felt like anything, and it never added to the game. It never. I've said so many times before, you can do blah if it adds to the game. You can do blah if it adds to the setting. You can do blah if it adds to the series. The war asset rating added nothing to anything. It did not improve. It did not add. It was not even cinnamon sprinkles. It was nothing. It was the air that happened to be on top of the pudding, and that's it. Nothing changed. It was unnecessary. It was superfluous. It was poorly executed. And it was used as a bit of a crutch, if I might be so honest. It was used as a bit of a development crutch because, again, so many of the rewards of the game were used in the terms of war asset rating because, players should care about this. and I'm just going to go ahead and stop on that topic. Let's go ahead and move on because I still need to get to the characters' pieces individually and a few other additional missions. Oh, goodness. Now, that's right. Pardon me just a moment. Another note I want to talk about later. One of the little things, while we're talking about little things, that I did actually like was the double bar idea. It never would have worked in Mass Effect 1 and 2, in my opinion, given the circumstances of those games, given the setting, given the plots. But in Mass Effect 3, it actually made a lot of sense that you have one respect bar, and this respect bar determines whether or not you'll be successful with your dialogue options, not whether you can do the blue one or whether you can do the red one. You can pick red or blue in that particular circumstances, in that particular circumstance, if you have the total number of respect for that. I liked that, and it made a lot of sense because for the first time in the series, it doesn't matter whether you're Renegade Shepard per se or Paragon Shepard per se. That's more there for flavor. What did matter is that you were well known enough overall, thanks to your actions in the galaxy and trying to unify the galaxy in order to make that call, in order to make that decision, in order to convince that individual or those individuals or however that ends up working. So I like that. I thought that was a good choice. As I'm waiting for everyone to say, what's the bad choice? Well, there was a bad side to that. I'm sorry. I keep trying to think of a universally good. There are a couple of universally good things. I already discussed, one of them, Rannoch, basically. Although that wasn't universally good, but it's pretty close. But one of the detriment of that is it effectively removed and this is also going to go into a compliment, by the way, but it did effectively remove the point of Renegade or Paragon at that point. It was like several of us had done back in Mass Effect 1 and 2, where we would crank the Paragon bar, and then we'd crank the Renegade bar through New Game Plusing. Now, again, that sort of removed the point. It sort of detracted from the whole point of having the bar to begin with, if you follow me. However, back into the positive here, what that did do was give us not only the choice on the matter, but made it so that it was a matter of flavor in virtually all cases. There were some circumstances where it did change how the missions progressed, but overall, it was mostly a matter, 80% of the time, it was a matter of flavor, it was a matter of, flavor text, of how it unfolded, of what kind of scenes, of what kind of cutscenes you wanted to pull out. So it worked in that favor. Now, there is another downside on this, not directly related to that, but it's something several of my commenters have mentioned, and I myself, I think I've mentioned before, and that was Mass Effect 3 had a really big problem in one very, very specific area. There's no positive here. It's understandable, but there is no positive here. So this is over here. There was a very noticeable lack of dialogue options in the cutscenes in Mass Effect 3. As I mentioned in the Mass Effect 3 demo, it felt like several of them were just missing, and I was like, okay, I'm with that. It's a demo. And then Mass Effect 3 comes out, and they're still missing. And that trend continued throughout the whole game. Now, there were some sequences where that wasn't true. The Tim, the Elusive Man confrontation on the Citadel is a perfect example of a situation where there were actually a decent number of conversation choices. But for the most part, there was a genuine lack, percentage-wise, I guess I should say, especially as compared to Mass Effect 2, or most especially compared to Mass Effect 1, which had a huge number of dialogue options everywhere. And having that, in a situation where, again, because of the dual bar thing, you're basically choosing flavor, you should continue to allow us to choose flavor, if you know what I'm saying. So I think that was a bad move, personally. My goodness. So we got that point down. Um, Looks like I've only got two other big points to go here, and then I'm going to go start talking about the characters. 3 points. I'm sorry, 3 points. 4 points. 4 points. They're all everywhere. I said I wasn't going to have a time limit on this one, and I meant it. I'm going to talk about Mass Effect 3 until I'm done. I hope you guys are okay with that. I probably should have said that about an hour ago. Um, the let's go ahead and talk about the Tachanka missions, because I'm tired of leaving those off. I do say missions plural because that started pretty early with the on the Solarian homeworld, dealing with the Cerberus operatives, all that fun sort of stuff. Now, I'm going to go ahead on record and say that I overall enjoyed that mission, most especially because there was a lot of side dialogue. There was a lot of fleshing out of several of the characters, including Morden and Rex and Eve, as we find out. And I liked the way Morden was being presented. I liked talking with Captain Kirihei. He was awesome as always. There were a lot of good parts about that mission. I did enjoy it, functionally speaking. However, there were a lot of logical and plot flaws in that mission. I'm not going to go over them specifically because I don't feel like getting into minutia. But there were several what we call fridge logic moments in that, which is you're with it at the time, but when when the theory is you're going back to the fridge and you're like, well, wait a minute, what about blah 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 blah. And so there were a lot of fridge logic problems with that mission, and I'm not going to go into the specifics, but it was something I'm at least willing to go with. So I'm still going to put that into the net positive. That leading into the several other missions you undergo, and finally leading into the big penultimate mission where you end up on Tachanka. You go through the underground ruins and you get Eve to the right spot, and oh god, that whole sequence was really cool. Leading up to something that most unfortunately was advertised all over the place. I really wish people would stop doing this. I really, really, really do. Um, I am really tired of this syndrome, which I'm going to look up the name of really quick, because I think it's called Snake Eyes Syndrome. Yes, it is. Snake Eyes was a film starring Nicolas Cage, had Gary Sinise in it, and it was done by Brian De Palma, which I might be saying wrong, so I do apologize if I am. Overall, a decent movie, but it had a very significant problem, and that problem is the entire fulcrum point of the entire movie was given away in the trailer. I use Snake Eyes as the example here because it was probably one of the most blatant examples of this I've ever seen in my life, where the movie was spoiled by the trailer. This is a fairly common theme, all things considered. Video games have this exact same problem too nowadays, and by nowadays I mean for the last 8 years. Video games tend to have big moments or moments of awesome spoiled by the trailers or by the advertising. Mass Effect 2 was a great example. What was one of the first things we learned about Mass Effect 2, apparently? I have to say apparently because I didn't follow it at the time, but supposedly one of the first adverts that came out was Shepard dies. Right there at the beginning. What? Why do you people do that? Why don't you just let us enjoy it? Why don't you just let us go through it and, maybe have a little spoiler tag or something, anything. Don't advertise the advertisement with this awesome scene. That's the only complaint I really have about Tachanka, is I knew the Thresher Maw, the queen of the Thresher Maws, fighting the Reaper Destroyer was coming. It was still awesome. I'll give it credit. I was still awesome, and I still felt awesome for putting it off. That was also the hardest fight I had in the entire game, by the way, even on the reduced difficulty, because I was getting tired of the boredom of it and the mundanity of it, as I described earlier. The fight against the multiple brutes or hulks or whatever they're called, and the multiple that whole sequence when you're going and turning on the shock pounder in order to bring the Thresher Queen was an incredibly difficult fight and felt appropriately difficult for the circumstance. It should, because obviously you can't fight the destroyer and you're not fighting the Thresher Maw, but you have to have some kind of epic fight there, like with Harbinger should have been, in order to really get the feeling of the scene across to the player, and that succeeded in that respect. So again, properly done, exactly as it should have been. And so you're riding this high, and you beat the thing, and then the Thresher Maw takes out the Reaper, and you're like, yes! And right before that was Rex's awesome little scene where Rex and Eve both, they're both going off to do something else while you do this, and both of them are just like, thank you, this means so much to us, this means so much to us. And Rex has this wonderful line, from now on, shepherd is going to mean hero in the Krogan language. And I believed him, by the way. I fully believed he meant every word he said there, that this was going to go down in history, and it was going to mean something culturally, societally speaking, historically speaking, to the Krogan people, that this is the turning point of the Krogan. I believed that, and it was awesome. And then you go and you do it, and all the scene progresses, and then my absolute favorite moment of all of Mass Effect 3, by far, bar none, happened. God, I'm actually kind of tearing up a little bit thinking about it, because Morden did exactly what Morden would have done. And he explained it himself perfectly, just how he should have. It made sense in a story perspective, it made sense from a character perspective, and it made sense artistically as a work of art, as something that was being enjoyed or viewed or entertained, or however you want to think of that. For him to die there should have happened. I hate myself for saying that. But Morden chose that. One of the questions I've been asked, I've been delaying on answering this, I'm going to answer this finally. One of the questions I've been asked is, would I change any of the deaths of the three individuals? I think I actually touched on this before. But the true reason I would not change any of the three deaths, of Legion, Thane, and Morden, is all three of them shared a very common thread. And this thread is important, this thread is powerful, and to remove it by bringing them back would have detracted from it in the same way that bringing Captain America back did. You take a wonderful, beautiful, artistic, heart-rending, tear-inducing scene and turn it into drivel. And that thread is, they died at peace. I've always been the kind of person who believes or feels, or however you want to put that, in fiction and reality both, that, mostly in fiction obviously, that when someone dies in a manner in which they are at peace, that they shouldn't be brought back. Pirates of the Caribbean 3 actually pulled this off really well. There's a scene where Elizabeth is desperately yelling for her father, who is dead and is sailing on his boat to the land of the dead, or the sea of the dead, I suppose. And, at the end of that scene, they turn to Tia Dalma and ask, is there a way? And Tia Dalma just slowly shakes her head no and says, no. Him at peace. I liked that because it really emphasized the fact that sometimes the dead are okay with being dead. And I really had the strong sense with all three of them, and indeed with Morden in the immediate example, that Morden was completely 100% content to die for such a cause. Had to be me. Someone else might have gotten it wrong. I love that scene. And that scene was beautiful. That scene is a lot of the reason why I still recommend Mass Effect 3 despite all its flaws. That one scene. After Tuchanka, of course, was the Citadel mission. I liked Thane. Not as much as, say, Morden. But Thane was an awesome character, and he deserved better than Kai Lang, if I might be frank. As much as I think Thane had a good send-off, it is unfortunate that Thane did end up dying as a result of being bested by Kai Lang. In my opinion, if they had edited that slightly, this is over in the negative category again, if they had edited that slightly to make it so that Kai Lang had to end up retreating, had to escape because Thane had defeated him in the fight, and then Thane dies of his internal injuries of having exerted himself in the fight, that would have made a lot more sense, and that would have been a lot more appropriate, it would have been a lot more satisfying, and God, it would have been so much more satisfying to see that little punk Kai Lang. This would have made the punk Kai Lang thing make a degree of sense. Build it up for that, or set it up for that scene, so that when Thane, a crippled, on his deathbed man who is 6 months or 8 months or whatever it is past the point when the doctors told him he should already be dead, beats the stuffing out of him. That would have been such a moment of crowning awesome, and that would have been a more appropriate send-off for Thane, in my opinion. As is, it was still acceptable, and it was still good once you got past the Kai Lang part. Once you got to the point, you stopped Udina, idiot. I'm not going to talk about Udina. He doesn't deserve being talked about, but I will say one thing really quickly. I don't think he was actually evil. I think he was just stupid. I mean that sincerely. I'm not trying to be insulting. I think he didn't think it through, was growing desperate, and was just stupid, and made a bad call. Moving on. And so, you do that, you beat them, you go to the thing, and, you have this amazing scene where you're sitting standing there over the prayer bed. According to a friend of mine, the scene is different whether you're male or female, because if you're female, as my shepherd was, you end up saying, the prayer with Thane's son, whose name I unfortunately can't think of right now, for a she. And at the end of it, Shepherd turns and says, "Why does it say she?" And he looks at your friend and says, "I thought you knew. This isn't a prayer for him, it's a prayer for you." That was very touching. That was very appropriate. And that was a wonderful bookend, because as those of you remember, Thane was introduced to us by saying a prayer, not not for the intended recipient, I guess I should put it in such terms. It was a very similar circumstance, and it was an excellent bookend, I thought, to how Thane was introduced to us. I do still lament Thane's death, but given the way he was approached and built up on Mass Effect 2, it would have been possible to make it so he could have lived, and I would have liked that, let's be honest with ourselves. But I do think Thane died at peace, and I do think that he deserved his send-off, if you know what I mean. Now, I could talk about a lot of other individual missions, but let's go ahead and get over to my last big point before I get down to the characters thing here. Choices. I was saying before that it really felt like your choices didn't matter in Mass Effect 3. I have had to revise this statement as time has gone on, because it's not that simple. It's not that linear. A lot of your choices do actually matter. There are a lot of variables that are imported that actually do have an effect and do change how the game goes, and several of the choices you make in Mass Effect 3 do change how Mass Effect 3 itself functions. An excellent example, just right off the top of my head, Kelly Chambers. You can interact with her, and you can continue a relationship with her, I believe, first of all, but let's ignore that one for the moment. That is still relevant, though. But in my own personal experience here, you encounter her, and she admits that she was sending information behind your back to the Elusive Man. Now, you can chew her out for that, in which case she commits suicide, which I did not do, obviously, or you can forgive her and encourage her to change her name. As I've found out, if you did not encourage her to change her name, there's an additional scene where she ends up being approached by the Cerberus operatives and shot in the face, basically. And that's an excellent example of a single individual character line, which can go like 5 different ways because of the choices you make. Okay, I'm with that. Another excellent example is all of the characters from Mass Effect 2 and their loyalty missions and whether or not they survived. This is both directions, because in some cases, if you didn't do the loyalty mission, or I'm sorry, let's take that back. If they didn't survive, that's the important one. That's the choice that really felt like it didn't matter, because in virtually every case, with a couple of exceptions, all that happened was you had a suspiciously similar substitute take over for them, and that would always perform worse. For example, the one who replaces Grunt always dies. If you end up if you don't let Kirihei live back in Mass Effect 1, I know that's a little unrelated, but whatever, then the new Solarian doesn't support you, blah, 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 blah. There are several circumstances like that. However, there are a couple that do have some rather significant impact, namely Jack, Jacob, Miranda, and Thane. That was the other big one I was going to mention. I think there's a couple others, but let's just go over those ones really quick. Jack, I liked what they did with Jack in Mass Effect 3. I actually admit that I was really happy to see that she had done something with her life and she'd gone somewhere with herself, and I was really gratified to see that. I think she deserved a better life, and I'm glad she found some kind of meaning taking care of the kids. That being said, if she's dead, that circumstance, obviously, that whole mission basically doesn't happen. I mean, it does happen, but it's completely different, because all the flavor and interest in the conversations are just kind of there and don't matter. But on top of that, if you don't do her loyalty and you let Cerberus take over her, well, let's just say there's an incredibly disturbing entry you can read about them torturing her into submission and indoctrinating her in order to use her as a phantom. Now, that's horrible, and there's a similar circumstance with Morinth, actually, and someone else. Legion's the other one. All 3 of those you can end up fighting, and depending on your choices in Mass Effect 2 and 3, to an extent. So, points there. Miranda, of course, the whole mission to Sanctuary, which I'm actually going to discuss in a moment here, and the whole deal with that, completely different based on whether or not you got her loyalty, and more importantly, whether or not she's alive. And I really was gratified that one of the biggest points that had been kind of bothering me in the back of my mind about Mass Effect 2 was finally wrapped up. If I might speak really quickly, that would be Miranda, someone who had been controlled by her whole life by this genetic destiny thing from her father, had been rebelling against both for herself and her sister her whole life, wanted to put a control chip into Shepard when they were rebuilding her, or him, as the case may be. Now that always didn't really gel with me. And I did like that there's a whole scene dedicated to that one point in Mass Effect 3. I really liked that. It was a real discussion of the character. It was a real analysis, or it was a real showing how much Miranda had truly grown as a person and changed and had become to acknowledge what she was and what she was trying to be and how she was accepting and blah blah blah. I really liked that scene. Um, but of course, if Thane is dead, to continue this theme here, Miranda is the one who ends up fighting Kai Lang, and if I'm not mistaken, Miranda basically always dies to him. There's no way to stop that, because again, she doesn't perform as well as the person if you'd actually done their loyalty and kept them alive. So that was a significant change. Thane just isn't even present there, and I believe it's not possible to save the Solarian counselor in that circumstance. I'm not actually sure on that one. Don't quote me. Um, I don't remember who the other one was I was going to talk about. Goodness, it is getting late. It is really getting late, but I'm still not done, so I'm going to still keep trying to go here. Bottom line is, there were several choices that did actually make an impact, and then there were several that just really didn't feel like they did. The Rachni Queen choice didn't matter basically at all. It mattered for war rating. That's it. It mattered for the war rating. That choice was irrelevant. The choice of what you did with the Geth consensus in Mass Effect 2, near as I can tell, I could be wrong about this, feel free to correct me, but as near as I can tell, that choice, the choice I labored over for like 3 weeks, the one big, huge, oh my gosh choice, no impact. Almost all of the choices I really spent so much time on. Oh yeah, by the way, the genophage is another good example. All the choices I really belabored on, all the choices that felt to me like big choices, really society, culture, setting, game impacting choices, didn't matter. Who became the new human counselor? Doesn't matter. Did you save the counselor or not? Doesn't matter. Did you do anything with Arachni? Doesn't matter. You know, I would actually argue that who you left behind on Vermeer doesn't matter either. Yes, you could say, of course it matters. It changes who's there. However, while it does change the character there and obviously their cutscenes, functionally speaking, all you're doing is slotting one in for the other. Nothing actually changes as a result of that. I'm going to go and still give him a side on that. I just want to make the point. This is kind of getting into gray or technically area, but a lot of the big choices, virtually all of the big choices, and a lot of choices in general, really didn't feel like they mattered. By contrast, they kept the trend Mass Effect 2 had started by having so many little choices affect flavor and add to the story in tiny little ways. I think the reason I'm so disappointed on this, and I'm going to call this a net negative overall, is because I Mass Effect 2 having little choices making flavor changes made sense because it was Mass Effect 2 of 3. You can't have the story branch out that significantly in part 2 of a trilogy. It is possible, but that's a development nightmare. When you're in part 3 of 3, you can have the story branch 15 different ways if you really feel like it, because you no longer have to shackle yourself to the idea that the save games get carried forward into Mass Effect 4 or whatever. And so they had the option to make those choices actually matter, and they didn't. They kept doing the Mass Effect 2 thing, which was just kind of discouraging, if I might be honest. But I will acknowledge that a lot of within the confines of individual missions, a lot of the choices you make in that mission and a lot of the choices you made prior to that mission do matter. Nowhere is this more powerfully noticed than the Tachanka mission. Yes, it's still the greatest part about Mass Effect 3, because if you screw up in any way in Mass Effect 3, things kind of go badly. If you screwed up in any way in Mass Effect 2, things go badly, and then can go badly even more if you screw up in 3. If you screw up completely in 2, and then things go really badly in 3, you get my point. The choices you made in 1, because whether or not Rex is alive, in 2, what you did with Rex, what you did with Morden, whether or not you got their loyalties, whether or not they lived, stuff like that, mattered. And all the choices you made in 3 regarding the Dalatress, regarding the Solarians, regarding how you're going to deal with the genophage, whether you told anyone about it, All of these choices actually changed that mission significantly and had impact in a way that actually showed rather than just changing your war rating. Perfect example. If you end up shooting Morden, or actually it doesn't really matter, but let's just go ahead and give that. If you end up getting to the point where where Rex is alive, Eve is alive, therefore you cannot convince Morden that the two of them, you cannot convince him out of fixing the problem with the genophage, then you have to shoot him. And that's a terrible, horrible, gut-wrenching scene, but let's just move on. It still changed things fundamentally, and so we've got that. And then Rex finds out about it and calls you on it, and you have to kill Rex after killing Morden. Ugh. But as much as that was a horribleness and much as that was terrible, I have to give props to this because it mattered, and it showed that it mattered. And it even added a horrible little macabre terribleness to it because they'd mention, we can't actually have a coffin or a funeral for Rex. We have to space him because we don't have the coffins that would fit him, and we don't have the time or the resources at the moment. That was horrible and gut-wrenching and terrible, and I'll never actually do that in any playthrough ever. But I do have to give props to BioWare for having those options matter. Again, Tuchanka Missions was just the pinnacle of this whole game, I swear. But and for so many different reasons, as I've been discussing, I've kind of unveiled 3 as I've been going here. But you get my point. There are options. There are points in which in Mass Effect 3 where the options, your choices do actually feel like they matter, and then others where I feel like they're completely irrelevant. And I would go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and chalk that one up to a time and money issue, for which they do get a pass. But I'm not going to lie and say it's okay, because it's not. It is still disappointing. It's still discouraging. In my professional opinion, they should have delayed the release and polished some more, and at least gone with the Tuchanka example and shown rather than told a little bit more than just tacking things onto the war asset rating and calling it a day. But I will give them a pass on it because I understand and I get it and I'm with it. So let's go ahead and talk about the other thing I was going to talk about. What was the other thing? Oh, yes. Sanctuary. Sanctuary was another example of a mission that was done very well. I've mentioned 2 so far, basically 3 sort of, because the Citadel was alright. Mostly uplifted by Thane. Let's just be honest with ourselves. And the fact that you get to kill Udina. I mean, how could you not enjoy that? But I've been wanting to do that since the first minute of Mass Effect 1. No, that's a lie. You don't meet him for like an hour. But still, first hour of Mass Effect 1, I wanted to shoot that guy in the face. I finally got to. But, ignoring that, there is one other mission I thought that was very much net positive. The Sanctuary mission. That was something that made sense in setting, had been foreshadowed the entire game. The first time you go into Citadel, you start seeing the Sanctuary ads, and you start hearing people talk about it. And it's a complete background noise thing, just like everything else is. If you're not really even paying attention, you won't even really catch it. It's just something that's there for flavor, except it's not, because it actually does end up being a rather significant plot point. Of course, that's another circumstance in which your choices do actually matter. Your choices in Project Overlord, your choices with Miranda. That's actually it, basically, but the point being, those choices do significantly affect how that mission plays out. Now, I, of course, had Miranda's loyalty and did Project Overlord and took care of the kid and blah, 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 blah. So, that ending up really nicely. And the whole mission was played out beautifully. You show up, it was a perfect, there's a term for that. I can't actually think of it. There's a literary term for when you show up after the events have happened, and as you're going through, you sort of find out piecemeal, bit by bit, what happened to lead to the state of events that exist right now. One of the reasons I have to give props to the Sanctuary mission is for the sheer unholy level of evil it engendered. Nothing the Reapers do, nothing the Catalyst does, nothing that with some exceptions, any other character, any other group in all of the Mass Effect series has done equals the sheer level of horrifyingly, terrifyingly, unforgivably evil nature that Sanctuary was. Now, I personally tend to take betrayal very seriously, and betrayal through deceit much more so. There is something utterly screwed up about selling people on this safe haven from the Reaper war place in order to kidnap civilians and practice indoctrination on them in some of the most terrifying ways possible. And that's the first time we find out that, if you'll forgive me for a quote, I don't remember where I read this, but being huskified on a dragon's teeth is apparently the preferred way of being husked, because those citizens, those colonists, found out the bad way, the worst way possible, that there are other ways to be husked, and that's screwed up. And they were doing it, and what's funny is, there's lots of blame that can be pointed at Cerberus for here. A lot of this really sits on an individual we already knew was a horribly sadistic, evil person. We just never met him before. Miranda's father, creator, whatever you want to call him, the designer. What in the hell? And so that whole mission never actually went over the line, in my opinion. It never hit squick, it never hit despair, it never hit too much realism. What it did do was went right up to the line, and it showed unflinchingly, and yet without going into unnecessary detail, exactly what you were up against. Not in terms of power, not in terms of force of arms, not in terms of logistics, in terms of what these people were willing to settle for, what these people were willing to sink to in order to accomplish their ends, which, by the way, are questionable to begin with. That whole mission was beautifully done and really well performed, and of course, as usual, had a degree of a happy ending. Not only is Sanctuary shut off and people are warned away and that whole problem is stopped, but Miranda gets to shoot her dad. Now, I'm sorry, that sounds a little anticlimactic, but after Mass Effect 2, I was really looking forward to the option of hunting that guy down in Mass Effect 3, and I was really glad we got the option to. And on top of that, I was very glad that I was able to talk him into things. I'm like, okay, we'll just let you go, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, okay, I'll let the girl go. And Miranda just shoots him, boom, right through the glass. That was exactly what should have happened. He deserved it. He deserved worse than that, actually. But Miranda, being no nonsense and the professional, isn't going to stick around and torture him because he deserves it. She just shoots him, boom, dead, gone, moving on. I liked that. I liked that a lot. I thought it was very well executed. It showed Miranda's personality, both as she has grown and as she's always been, and her obvious caring, not only about her sister, but about the situation as a whole. And in fact, by the way, while I'm on this subject, I mentioned it was foreshadowed well in advance. Miranda and her involvement with this was also foreshadowed well in advance. The whole time she's like, I can't tell you what I'm doing. I can't tell you what I'm doing. I need your help, but I can't tell you what I'm doing. The whole time that's happening, I decided to trust her. I knew full well, especially based on the way the theme of Mass Effect 3 was going and the way they were presenting it, it was actually very possible, and indeed probable, that Miranda had betrayed me, either willingly or through indoctrination. I was very gratified. I was very satisfied to find out that she was not, that she was in fact just doing her own thing. And she even explains it perfectly. Shepard, you're off saving the galaxy. I'm trying to stop this one little problem with my dad and these people. And yes, it's a big problem, but it's nothing compared to you going off and saving the galaxy. I couldn't bug you with this because I knew you'd come running, like we end up doing. I thought it was perfectly designed, perfectly written, perfectly executed, perfectly introduced, perfectly foreshadowed. No complaints about that at all. And in fact, it didn't go over the line. That's important. It's too easy to go over that line and go into squick or horror or unnecessary detail or gore or whatever you want to call it. There's all different terms, but it's so easy to go over that, especially when you're dealing with something as inhuman and as horrible and as evil as that. And they didn't. Props. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the characters. And then I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Obviously, Kaiden, you can tell I never really had the guy in my party and never really talked to him because I don't even know how to pronounce his name. That's probably something sad, and I do apologize. I don't mean to be disrespectful. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but obviously I don't know anything about him whatsoever, so let's just go ahead and move on from that. Tali, as I already mentioned, there's not much I can actually add to that. I did think that her character arc was basically finished in Mass Effect 3. I think her and Garrus getting together made perfect sense, is something that kind of should have happened for a long time. And when I say that, I mean that's the kind of situation where when Shepard just says, I'm really happy for both of you, that was basically exactly what I was going to say, me, the person playing the game, I'm really happy for both of you. You both deserve each other, that's great. That's awesome. It's about time, if I might be so bold. And so I like that. I like that development. I liked her finally while she had definitely grown and she had definitely advanced and she had definitely matured, Tali was still Tali, and I liked that. I liked that her character had finally reached that sort of conclusion. And in fact, one of the things I really wanted to talk about in this review, I'm sorry for derailing for just a moment. One of the things that was discussed a lot before the extended cut DLC came out was that there was no closure to the game. I actually, believe it or not, disagree with that. Even before the extended cut. I'm sorry. Ah, hair. It's so humid in here because of the heat that my hair is just going all over the place. I actually felt there was a great deal of closure in the game. It's just the ending gain axed out of nowhere. And there were other problems with the game that were unrelated to that. But Tali's character arc ended. She was set. She had successfully accomplished what she was going to do. The Geth and the Quarian had finally made peace for the first time ever, basically, and were going to help each other in order to benefit both, in order to coexist as they should have from the beginning. And she was going to be able to retire and live her life. And yes, yes. Next character, Liara. Liara's character had finally let go of the reins of the Shadow Broker and the information trade. She had let go of the allure of what that power means and what it can do to you. And she'd started that in Mass Effect 2 even before she became the Shadow Broker. You could see she was leaning towards that direction, and I was really worried she was going to go too far and step over the brink and fall into that old axiom about power corrupting, which I disagree with, actually, but you get my point here. And I like the fact that she then willingly turned away from that and was like, nope, I'm still Liara. And still used her resources, but used them intelligently, used them openly, far more openly than the Shadow Broker ever did. Used them for the forces of good, used them in order to help make the galaxy a better place and to coordinate people and resources and information where it actually could do some good. And, of course, was wanting to sit down and have the little blue children with my shepherd. And even regardless of that, the Liara's character arc really did come a good bit of a full circle there, from the completely naive, innocent young woman to the hardened, darkened one, wizened by the world and willing to take any circumstances, and then realizing that that's not actually her, and finally letting go of the mask and making it full circle here. I liked that. I liked how Liara did that and had that full circle, and I really enjoyed the scene where right after, I think, the romance scene, which is unskippable, by the way, with Shepard and her, they're laying back in the bed and looking up at the stars and thinking, look at all that space and all that stars. How easy would it be to take a ship and just get lost out there? And I liked that concept of just wanderlust and the desire for freedom and the open frontier. That's something that's always appealed to me personally. And so I really got that, and I really liked that, and I really liked that as an expression of her character, because ultimately that's kind of where she's always been at, the freedom to go out and do her own thing, as exemplified in Mass Effect 1 when you find out that she did her whole archaeology career basically in the full face of what her mother was wanting for her to do, and blah, 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 blah. Garrus. Again, full circle here. He went from being the rogue Turian who basically nobody really cared about. Anyone who knew about him had basically disowned him, to someone who gained a great deal of prestige based on being with Shepard, and then to someone who actually managed to make something of himself and a great deal of reputation and prestige as Archangel, before finally coming all the way back around and actually becoming the expert and the person who's giving orders to generals and admirals within the Turian hierarchy because of his experience and because of the fact that he went to his father. And this is important. He finally went back to his father. That plot thread had been sitting there since Mass Effect 1. Since the beginning of Mass Effect 1, basically. One of the first conversations you have with him is about his father. And one of the first optional conversation you have with him. And he finally went to his father and basically said, look, here's what's going on. I'm going to lay out the whole story. And his father believed him, believed it because it made sense, and started moving people. And that's one of the whole reasons the Turians were even remotely ready when the Reapers came, was because of his father. And Garrus helped that happen. And he finally gained acceptance, not as the towing the line soldier, but as Garrus, as himself, as the guy who was willing to go past the orders and past the law and past the chain of command in order to do what is right, the chaotic good, the renegade, if I could put it in such terms, rather than a typical Turian, and being accepted for that for the first time in his life. And it all came back together with that wonderful scene you have with him on the Citadel, on the rooftop. I've been wanting to do this for years. I loved that scene. That was beautiful. And for the record, I let him take the shot because I don't have a better way to put this, because it was right. because it was the correct thing to happen in that scene, and it was awesome. I loved it, and I loved Garrus and Shepard being Nakama, being. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, by the way. I'm not that as versed as pronouncing English words apparently, but yeah, Japanese words. You know, the bond, the camaraderie, the friendship. There is no Shepard without Vicarian. I loved that, and I loved how it was exactly what that kind of relationship should have been, and that scene showed it so well. Those two were stronger than brothers, stronger than friends, stronger than lovers, stronger than any other bond you could say in the whole of the game. There was no Shepard without Vicarian. I love that. Next on the list, James Vega. Now, James Vega is unfortunately one of the reasons. In fact, he's actually the only reason I can say that Mass Effect 3 does not have the "I like every character who is part of your party member" thing stamp. You know that only a few games have ever reached that, like Mass Effect 2, like Dragon Age, Final Fantasy 6, etc. Chrono Trigger. Point being, James Vega is the reason I can't do that. And as I've said before, my problem with James Vega is basically that he is a personality type I have trouble getting along with in real life. I respect them. I honor them, the people who are of that type of mentality, but I cannot get along with them personally. It's just a differentiality in personality. And so I try to be respectful and I try to be nice, but I'm never going to like you. There's nothing personal. It's the Elvis thing all over again. Elvis was an incredible man who had great talent and really added to music as a whole, was very talented, changed the face of music in many ways, shapes, and forms. I can't stand Elvis's music. It actually bothers me to listen to it. That never means I'm not going to acknowledge that man's contribution. Same exact concept here. On top of that, James Vega also had the, I'm going to start calling it the Kai Lang problem. I think I am going to start calling that in future commentary. The Kai Lang problem of being shoehorned in without any real long-term plans in mind. They were talking about how Vega was supposed to be, the new man's perspective, someone who'd never came to the game before, and it showed. James Vega didn't belong in the Mass Effect series. James Vega felt a lot more like I don't even know how to put it, actually. I can't think of an analogy there. He felt like someone who was like, oh, what's going on? He didn't fit. He never actually fit. There was never a niche for him. There was never a real point of him being around. He always felt like he was trying to mug the camera in order to be like, hey, I'm here, just so you know. Okay, I'm going to go back to sitting down now and doing my endless pull-ups in the bay because I got nothing else to do, Never actually did anything with it. Never actually went anywhere with it. And I thought that was a shame because I think that if they had made him a non-party member character, I think it would have worked better. Or on top of that, if they had fleshed him out a bit, actually did something like they did with Ashley, for example. Ashley had personality and character and development underneath that, and Vega really didn't. So he ended up being a ship rat for me. So what can I say? I apologize for everyone who disagrees with me because I'm not trying to upset you with my opinion. This is purely my opinion, is what I'm saying. This is just my opinion based on my personal experiences. I know a lot of people do like Vega, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just he was the character I didn't like in Mass Effect 3, so shrug. Moving on. Ashley Williams. I thought Ashley was actually pretty well done. I heard a lot of people complain about how paranoid and bitter she was about the whole Cerberus thing, but actually that makes a lot of sense for me. Not just from people in general, but from Ashley Williams, someone who is a very hardline military, someone who has now finally gotten the rank that she deserves and gotten somewhere in her life, and finally ends up becoming a Spectre for that matter. Ashley Williams should have been paranoid, should have been untrusting of you, because she wasn't actually with you in Mass Effect 2. She doesn't know what you were doing. She wasn't there for you. She wasn't there with you. She only saw you the one time for like 20 minutes on I can't even think of the name of the planet now. The planet. Um, that's it. That's the only time she was there. And she never had the opportunity to learn, oh yeah, you're still Shepard. Oh yeah, you're still helping the galaxy. She might have heard reports, but those reports would almost certainly have been incomplete and slanted, and she might not have been able to believe them. You get the point across. So she had every reason to be suspicious. And the fact that it took that long for her to not be suspicious made perfect sense to me. And Ashley had a lot of really good scenes too, not the least of which when you're with her in the hospital and she's still recovering. I was really worried Ashley was going to die, and I think that's a turning point for me. As I mentioned in Mass Effect 1, Ashley never really grew on me. It wasn't until all the way over here in Mass Effect 3 she finally grew on me as a character, and I actually did care. I actually was like, no, don't die, Ashley. Come on, no. We gotta do this. And I was really gratified that she didn't die. And I was like, yes, please join me, join my squad. Let's go. Let's do this. Let's end it together because we never got to start it together because I was always with the aliens. But and on top of that, there's a scene I want to mention with her specifically. Actually, I want to mention one other scene too, really quick, if I may. But the scene with Ashley was when, just after you got off Sanctuary, Ashley is lying there. Or, no, I'm sorry. That's when she was super drunk. Or was that the same scene? I actually can't remember. It was either two scenes or one. I apologize. Vague memories. One where she was so drunk that she was having the splitting headache. That was actually an awesome, hilarious scene that I loved and was very appropriate. But the other scene, or possibly the same scene, was when she's talking about Sanctuary, and she's talking about how she doesn't understand how people can do that, and how thankful she is for that. I really liked that, because that's really where it's at for a lot of people. They look at something so evil, so decrepit, so hideous, and they cannot understand it, and that gives them some level of comfort. This is true in real life, too, by the way. This is true in here, in the real world. You look at something that some of the people have done that are just hideous, evil, screwed up, terrible, nightmarish, and you don't understand it, and that lack of understanding is comforting because, as Ashley herself puts it, it makes you feel more human. I liked that. I really liked how they fleshed her character out on that. The other scene I wanted to mention really quick is the emergency induction port. Okay, I need to very carefully put it through the mask. That was an awesome scene. That was after Sanctuary because she was talking about Miranda's father and her issues with that. That was an awesome scene, and there were a lot of pretty cool scenes like that. But those are the two that really stuck out in my mind. I really wanted to mention both of them. Sorry for derailing just for a moment. Javik, or however the heck you pronounced his name, Prothy the Prothean. Um, I actually liked Prothy the Prothean, if I might say so. He was what I actually pictured a modern Prothean to be. The Protheans had always been lifted up as these wonderful, amazing people from the past, and I could see why that would be done. And it's very possible the Protheans, in their height, when they actually were the dominant race in the galaxy, would have been that kind of idealistic, uh, utopian society, right? Javik was from when the Protheans were basically almost gone. The Reapers were like 70% of the way through their conquest of the galaxy, and there was nothing left for him or his people. That, regardless of species, is going to produce a very different type of person, and I think Javik was perfectly suited for that. He was never actually being cruel, per se. He was never trying to be mean or evil or anything like that. He was very blunt, he was very to the point, and everything in his life was focused on exactly what he himself was supposed to be, the avatar of vengeance for the Protheans. And it was also appropriate because popping a Prothean into the party was something that was going to have to be done with care and with thought. And picking someone who is a military man was a good choice because he knows enough about what happened in the previous cycle to be able to share some insight on it. But because he was because he was a military man, however, because he was a military man, he doesn't know everything. He doesn't know all the details. He doesn't know the science, the culture. He does not have 100% of the story to share, which is correct. That's exactly what the balance they needed for something like that, for that kind of info dump, for that kind of character information and setting exposition. It was very well done. It was very well executed, I thought, and I do think that was a correct inclusion for them to do. I also like the fact that the choice you make with Javik, whether or not he uses a shard, both options both make sense and were satisfying. Whether you convince him not to look at the shard, such that he decides he would like to stick around after the Reapers are defeated and enjoy a degree of peace, and see what peace is like for the first time in forever, because all he's known is war, both before in his cycle and now when he's woken up. Or he does engage himself in the shard, and he does remember exactly what happened, and he does want to go to where his comrades have fallen and take his own life, and finally, at last, ironically, be at peace. I think both of those outcomes were correct, were satisfying, were appropriate, and made a lot of sense. And that scene in general made me have a lot more empathy for him as a character. And you really have to think about that for a moment. How would it be like to be in his shoes, or whatever? What would it be like to go through what he went through? That's the kind of thought that can keep you up at night. And I recommend you not think about it, to be completely honest with you. But it is something that was worth noting. It is something that the developers thought of, the writers thought of, and they did get across in his character and his tone and his writing very accurately. Last character to talk about here, with a couple of exceptions, Edie. Making Edie a player character, kind of a controversial decision. This is going to be a go ahead and one of the, again, one of those left and right things again here. On the good side, I do think she deserved to be a character. I liked Edie a lot in 2. I think she had a lot of character in 2. I think the revelations about her character, the fact that she was the AI in 1, and the fact that she chose of her own free will in order to join your crew, regardless of the restrictions they put on her, blah, 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 blah. I do think all of that was excellent. I think that her character evolved and grew. I liked the fact that she kept approaching you, asking you about certain things regarding the circumstances, regarding the situation, and reached her own conclusions based on your guidance. And I really enjoyed those cutscenes where I kept going back, Edie, you want my advice again? No? Okay, I'll go do another mission. Edie, you want my advice again? Because I really liked those scenes. I really liked watching her develop as an individual, and it made a lot of sense. Now, this is all on the positive side of the things. Why did she look like that? I know it doesn't technically matter because she's a robot, but that actually just emphasizes all the more why it shouldn't have been there to begin with. I was already upset. There was one thing I forgot to mention back in Ashley. Ashley seemed to have a chest upgrade for absolutely no reason. All of a sudden, her chest was emphasized out of nowhere, and Shepard's chest was also made bigger, only tiny bit though. She was still tolerable. That didn't bother me. But Ashley and Edie both were just kind of like, what? Why? I mean, ignoring the fact that, I don't have anything metal around here, but, that's about what that would have felt like. Why is that even there? Why does she have this ridiculously, almost artificially grotesque, I don't have a better word for it, curvaceous, grotesquerie form? It was completely unnecessary, added nothing to her, added nothing to the character. The only thing it offered was a single line for Joker, who was like, I wish I had a picture of that. And even that line didn't mean anything. It didn't add anything. It didn't add anything to Joker. It didn't add anything to her. Why? I don't understand. You could have had her have a more unisex model. You could have had her have a fully female model, complete with the robot hair. I'm okay with the robot hair. That was a little bit more toned down. Yes, sex appeal. I don't care. I'm sorry. I don't. From a character's perspective, from an in-setting perspective, from a piece of art perspective, it's pandering, and frankly, it's a little insulting. If you want to make someone sexually attractive, you don't do so like that. That's going too far the other way. You make someone attractive by emphasizing in subtleties, in slights. You do little touches, you do little aspects, little emphases here and there. It's possible to do that and still accomplish your goal without just giving a female a rack like this and an ass like this. There are other ways to do that. That was just disappointing. While I'm still on Edie, though, let's go back to the good side of things here, back to the positive aspect here. I actually thought her relationship with Joker was correct. I've already discussed why, but to summarize in brief, for those of you who didn't watch it, I think it was one of the Q&As, I thought Joker and Edie should have gotten together because the two of them are the only individuals I could think of in the context of the series that would have actually genuinely loved each other without thinking of each other as a cripple and a AI, respectively, first. They would have thought of them as Joker and Edie first, and any other thoughts didn't matter to begin with, and so they were actually a really good couple. They actually fit really well, and it did help that there was a lot of chemistry between the two, as the actors pulled off beautifully. The actors, this was true in Mass Effect 2 as well, and something that had been foreshadowed well in advance. This is, the relationship between the two grew throughout all of Mass Effect 2. And reached the point of genuine trust and bonding in Mass Effect 2, and then just kind of kept going in Mass Effect 3. Mass Effect 3 was a logical progression, and I did encourage both of them to continue it because I thought it was the correct thing, and I thought they both, frankly, deserved each other. There's a section... Oh, shoot, I meant to bring this up. I apologize. I'm going to pull this up real quick here, because I believe I can find the section really quick-alike. Oh, my goodness. But anyways, my point is that I thought it was an excellent way to develop both characters and actually make them feel more, if you know what I mean. It added to both. Well, the other characters I'm going to talk about, let's go ahead and glance at the list here. I already mentioned Jack. Jacob was disappointing in every possible way, shape, and form. Jack at least would acknowledge your relationship with him, or her, I'm sorry, relationship with her, and that would have had a relevance and mentioned in the scene and blah, 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 blah. As opposed to Jacob, who, no matter what you do, cheats on you, goes off with what's-her-face, and ends up basically saying, yeah, I'm out, peace. That was very pat. It was very half-assed. It was very done. It felt like it had no point to it, you know? It felt like there was no point to it at all. And I really felt bad for the people who actually romanced Jacob, because that had to have been terrible and pointless and irritating and frustrating. That whole thing was just really poorly done. Jacob deserved better. I liked Jacob, damn it. And I thought he was an interesting character. I thought he developed well in Mass Effect 2, and I think he deserved better than that. Here it is. This is a direct quote from a book I wrote once upon a time. Lecture time. No being understands the terrible beauty that is human love and sexuality, and the mystery has not been unraveled, even over centuries. But aside from desire, companionship, and its resulting offspring, there is obviously a deeper reason as to why a young pair decides to make two hearts beat as one. These two individuals' affair is a pure example of love conquering lust, and is a especially prime example of patience, problem-solving, and thoughtfulness. The two individuals are watching. This is between a human and a robot, by the way. The love I'm mentioning here, the one she's referencing, is between a human and a robot. Alright, I'll translate for the peanut gallery. Her love for him, for obvious reasons, goes way beyond her just wanting to throw him down and mount the pony. Surely the feeling is mutual between them, and I admire that. Now, that's probably not the most tasteful thing I've ever written, but the point I was trying to get across was that it wasn't just about biological need for desire or for procreation. There was an obvious emotional connection between the two characters, and this is also true with Joker and Edie. And that's kind of what I liked about it and why I was encouraging it. So let's go ahead and move on here. What else? Who else was there? Grunt. I liked Grunt's mission. It was a little... Actually, I didn't like Grunt's mission, and I liked and didn't like Grunt's mission. The fact that it was the Rachni mission, and everything about the Rachni, didn't like. Grunt and his role in it, loved it. I loved the way Grunt was being presented. I loved the way he was executed. I was really sad because I actually thought he was going to die, and when he came back, I was like, yes! Yes! Because Grunt lived. Of course, he should have lived, let's be honest with you. It's Grunt. If anyone was going to live through that, it was Grunt. And it was awesome that he did, and I loved it. But, you know, very bipolar situation there. Kasumi had her own little section. That was amusing with regards the works of the Enkindlers in Despair, or whatever the heck its name was. And that whole thing was just kind of amusing in its own right. And expected, fully expected. It was something I'd actually been anticipating ever since Mass Effect 2, was because the Hanar worship the Protheans, and the Protheans, technically, worked for the Reapers, and that was a logical connection I had made, and I was wondering if they were going to mention that in 3, so props to that one. I already mentioned Thane, I already mentioned Miranda, I already mentioned Legion, Elusive Man. Zaid, was he even there? He had like a tiny little role, didn't he? Barely anything, which is a shame. Zaid deserved more. And that's all I'm going to say on that. And of course, Admiral Zal Koris Vaz Quib Quib. That poor guy. Who else was there? Samara. Oh, yes. I'm going to go ahead. Okay, I'll talk about Samara. And, is that really it? I suppose it is. Alright, well, let's talk about Samara then. I thought the whole mission to the monastery was actually very interesting and very well done. I think that was basically perfect because, as I've mentioned before, Samara's code binds her in a way that it's hard for most people to understand, and her choosing to shoot herself rather than to go forward with her code and take out her daughter was excellent, and the fact that you could interrupt it was even better. And I loved the way that worked out, and I loved finding the third option there. I loved the fact that the other daughter in question was indoctrinated, but did manage to fight it off for just long enough to have that wonderful scene. You know, we are not your slaves or puppets or tools or whatever term she used. Wonderful scene, I loved that. And that whole section really added a lot of insight to how the Arnakshi, something like that, I can't think of the term right now, were regarded. And it was Velvet Prison is what I've usually referred to that as, or Golden Handcuffs if you prefer. Or handcuffs, sorry, golden handcuffs. The idea is you imprison someone, they don't have the choice to leave, but the way you do it is you do it in a way that they want to stay, and you do everything in your power to make it so that they want to keep staying there, and they want to do so, and you make their lives as pleasant as you possibly can without having, you know, the ability to leave. And I liked the fact that there was still obviously some genuine respect for these Asari. They were being treated as dangerous, but still individuals who are fighting an affliction. There was a lot of obvious, or I shouldn't even say obvious, there were a lot of really well done parallels between that and the mages of the Dragon Age series in general, most especially in Dragon Age Origins, where, because the Ferelden Mage Tower was probably one of the more down the middle neutral mage towers, as opposed to several of the others we encountered, which are a lot more strict or lenient depending on the circumstances, such as Tevinter or with the city whose name I suddenly can't think of in Dragon Age 2. Very noteworthy city. City of blood, 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 blood. Anyways, but I liked the correlations there, and I liked the comparisons of the two, because it's the same general circumstance. They're a threat. It's not necessarily their fault. We're going to take care of them, but we have to keep them confined. And it's a nice balance point, and I did like how there were all sorts of little logs about how they had been breaking curfew in order to watch some video or something like that. Something so minor and so harmless, and yet it really helped flesh out the circumstance and the culture of the Asari in general. And with that as a weird ending point, I'm kind of out of things to talk about, believe it or not. Like I said, overall, Mass Effect 3 was still a good game, I think. I still think it was an enjoyable game. I still think it was worth buying. I wish I hadn't bought it new, to be completely honest with you, but I had no way of knowing. Has BioWare re-earned my trust in them? No, of course not. That's not how that works, at least not with me. I've heard a comparison here, and this is actually the exact comparison I've used myself here. If I am married to a woman or whatever, for 4 years, and everything's great and wonderful, and she cheats on me one day, if she comes back and apologizes and we talk about it, is my faith in her, is my loyalty in her, is my trust in her restored? Of course it isn't. It's not that simple. That kind of thing, once broken, takes time to heal and then to rebuild. I'm not going to say that's impossible, and I actually do have a lot of hopes for Dragon Age 3, but that's gone. It's not coming back. Now, they did make a good step with the extended DLC. Like I said, overall, I do think it was overall positive. If nothing else, because of the Refusal DLC ending, which felt like a Mass Effect ending to me. It was the only one of the four that actually felt like a proper ending to the Mass Effect series. I shouldn't say a proper ending. Felt like a Mass Effect ending. Felt like it continued the themes of the series, like I mentioned earlier. I'm sorry, I'm kind of repeating myself here. Bottom line is, Mass Effect 3 was still an interesting contribution to the arts, and will probably... I'd like to say it serves as a milestone, but the problem is it won't. It will not change anything, it won't do anything. It will only affect the individuals, but that's still important in its own right. I'm sure there's many people, such as myself, who will now be looking at BioWare with a slightly more steady hand. And that may make a change. That may change things. That may alter the way they function in the future under EA's umbrella. Because if we don't buy their games new, their profit margins are going to change. And if we do only buy their games used or on sale, that's going to send a message, because there are people who are going to get that information. And I think that's relevant, and I think that's pertinent, and that is what I'm going to do, at least for the immediate future. So here's hoping that Dragon Age 3 is worth it. Now, I thank you all for listening to me with this. I'll understand if several of you decide not to stay with me, because I know Mass Effect 3 has been kind of a fulcrum point for us, hasn't it? But overall, it's been an interesting journey, and I am planning on continuing doing these videos. Let me make this absolutely clear. I have already figured out a way to do these at home, and I've worked out with the family, a way to be like, recording, please leave me alone, But I will be talking to you guys soonish about Diablo 1.